Good evening. Welcome to the May 25th meeting of the Lake Forest Historic Preservation Commission. Commission's here tonight to work together with all of you, property owners, neighbors, and architects to continue the tradition that was established nearly 40 years ago in this community. Sorry about that.
Press the button there.
No, it's on.
Yeah.
That tradition is a review process that allows community members to work together to preserve the qualities and unique character that make Lake Forest a special community. The City of Lake Forest is committed to conducting open and democratic meetings. To achieve that goal, meeting procedures have been adopted by the Commission. A copy of the procedures is available at the back room on each agenda. As always, it's the intent of the Commission to help manage the development and growth of the City of Lake Forest with a keen sense of preserving the historic structures and open space in the city for all its present and future residents. Our goal is to move each petition before us tonight through the review process as quickly as possible while balancing the interests of the petitioners, neighboring property owners, and the larger community.
Tech.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we'll start with an introduction of the commissioners and staff.
Mary Ellen Swenson.
Guy Berg.
Kurt Peretz.
Fred Moyer.
Bill Ransom.
Megan O'Neill. Kathy Cernier.
Thank you, folks. And we have meeting minutes before us this evening from the March 23rd meeting and also the April 27th meeting of this year. And I don't know if anybody has any comments. I think there was a few email corrections. Anybody else need any comments? If not, I'll move for a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Berg, second. Commissioner Swenson. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. I believe it was unanimous. All right, we get to start this evening with recognition of a past commissioner, Virginia McTeer. And Virginia, I should have you come up, stand up. And I wish I had a plaque to give you, but I have to thank you for your 6 years of service to the Lake Forest. Oh, there we go. Yeah, you can. Yeah, please hang on. I'm going to give you. I'm going to read a little something for you. I don't have a plaque this evening because it's not ready. So staff will give that to you when it is ready.
I know that.
They're giving you an extra special plaque, I'm sure. But this is 6 years you were with us, and your passion for historic preservation in the City of Lake Forest was only superseded by your wealth of knowledge about the community. You seem to know something about every residence that came before the commission. Your insights and anecdotal comments added particular interest to our many meetings. The Commission, and I'm sure staff as well, will miss you and your thorough review of every meeting minutes, whether 3 pages, 26 pages, or more. You've always made sure the minutes were accurate and complete. You were always gracious in recognizing petitioners and architects for a job well done, and for those petitions that were not quite there, you helped push them in the right direction, and you made a difference. On behalf of the entire Commission, thank you for your time, your effort, your commitment to the Historic Preservation Commission and the entire community. It was a pleasure serving with you.
That was fast.
Sorry.
Thank you so much. I loved working with all of you. I love particularly Guy's language. His verbiage is fantastic. But I think the people that really deserve accolades are Megan and Kathy. Without them, we could never be what we have done. And so I would like to give you these.
I'd like to also take this time to thank Virginia for the 6 years of her service on the board, and I was lucky enough to be with her for 5 of those. So.
We couldn't do our job without these two lovely ladies, and Peter Patton too. Give him my love. But anyway, they have been wonderful fun, and you're so articulate, and your minutes are great. And I don't know when you ever sleep. You just work so hard. So if it was without you, we would have been nothing. So thank you.
I think we can applaud. All right, so our first petition this evening is a continued petition. This is a request for a certificate of appropriateness approving the demolition of a pool and pool house and approving a replacement landscape plan at 902 North Green Bay Road. And I'll ask if we have any ex parte conflicts, and I see none, so we'll go ahead with the petition.
Okay. Hi. Good evening. Can you hear this okay?
I have not spoken so much in the past about our project, but I'm going to take about a minute and a half, because I know we only have 10 minutes, to talk about 902 North Green Bay Road. It's been 4 years of my life at this point. I was born and raised in Lake Forest. I lived here for 22 years and spent the last 4 years in Chicago waiting for this house. 2 years we're waiting for the Chandlers to decide to sell it to us, and 2 years have been trying to get it right. And now we're in the home stretch. But I think the most important thing that I would like you all to consider as you look at the drawings that we have and at the petition to remove the pool house is that when my husband and I looked at houses, we probably looked at about 40 houses in Lake Forest, and we were looking for something very specific. And what we were looking for was an entire property and house. It was the combination of the two. It was never in our minds considered, the house was never considered separate from the property. We wanted a house from this time period, and the more the property reflected that time period as well, the more we liked the house. In fact, we'd actually spent a number of years trying to purchase a different house down Green Bay Road that just didn't work out for this exact reason. When we look at this house and we look at this property and the renovations that are underway, you all were wonderful in helping us with those renovations to restore the house to 1911, to restore the house to what Shaw had envisioned. In doing so, it did require the removal of the influence of Ike Coburn. And again, when we looked at the property, we looked at restoring this property to 1911. We looked at making this house and property an example of what a house and property would have looked like in Lake Forest at the time of 1911, and seen what Shaw saw, only more mature, and really brought it back to what it was originally supposed to be within the constraints of our budget. We are not rebuilding the sun porch at the end, maybe someday. We are not restoring the U-shaped driveway, maybe someday. But we really have done everything we could to bring it back to what it was. I know at the last the last historic meeting, there were two women who were very concerned with the removal of the Ike Coburn pool house. I spoke with them after the meeting. I gave them my phone number. I said, if there is anywhere that we can put it, we will pick it up and we will move it anywhere that you would like it to go. I have not heard from them. I don't know if they are here this evening. I also spoke with Marcy, thank you, Megan, at the Preservation Foundation, the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation, which is the organization these women were a part of. And she got some information from me that dimensions all the photos that I had of the pool house, and she was supposed to send it out in an email to all of their members. Because I did get a list of people who owned at one time Ike Coburn houses, but you start calling those people and they start thinking that you're kind of crazy and why are you calling me, and that's not who lives here anymore. And so we felt the email was the better way to go. And in the email I did say, please, let them know this is here. We will bring it to you. And we have not heard anything back from that either. The house, the pool house itself, I understand is a wonderful pool house. I know Ike Coburn was very influential in Lake Forest. We have documented that pool house. We are more than willing to document it to whatever extent you would need it to be documented. I spoke to someone about taking it down and preserving it, a man named Fernando, who does a lot of the masonry work in town, and he said he's worked extensively on that house, and preserving much of the brick would simply be preserving a lot of the work he did to the house. About 15 years ago, he spent about a week essentially rebuilding a lot of it. So I don't know what else I can speak to about it, so I'm going to go ahead and let Charles take over, unless you all have any direct questions for me.
We might later, but thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Charles Stick. The intent of this is John and Stephanie purchased this property in 2008 with the specific intention of reestablishing the historic character of not only the Howard Van Dorn Shaw House from 1911, but also the historic landscape that was created by two masters in the field of landscape architecture. namely Mr. H.P. White and Mr. Ferruccio Vitale, both of whom were important participants in the landscape architectural history of Lake Forest and very definitely on a national level. Mr. and Mrs. Harris have collaborated with the Historic Preservation Commission in a comprehensive and consistent manner to ensure that all aspects of their renovation project are in keeping with the goals of the Commission and that it is in harmony with the spirit of the plans delineated by Mr. White and Mr. Vitale from 1911 and from 1927. My emphasis here tonight is that we are trying to treat this as a comprehensive whole, a house and a garden, not just a house. The proposed landscape master plan has been developed with the intent of reestablishing the original spirit of the historic property as defined by the schematic master plan from 1911, which shows the Shaw House set within a clearly defined series of garden rooms. Mr. and Mrs. Harris, with the help of landscape architect Charles Stick, intend to restore the character of this property to its original conception. This plan will be implemented with a careful consideration of the natural evolution of the site, including the location and subsequent growth of mature trees, as well as certain hardscape modifications, such as the alteration of the main entry drive. The proposed plan will include a faithful and thorough restoration of the formal garden to the south of the house. The flower gardens, cutting gardens, and shrub borders, including the circular or elliptical garden to the northwest of the main residence, will be restored to their historic layout. The proposed swimming pool is to take the place of a hard surface tennis court, which is presently in a bad state of repair, located in the southwest corner of the property. The proposed pool maintains an axial relationship with the original garden spaces from the 1911 plan. The proposed pool will be integrated into the landscape as the terminus of the original woodland garden pathways. The pool will be completely encased in an evergreen hedge, in keeping with the character of the garden rooms that were part of the original landscape plan. The proposed plan shows the bluestone terrace occupying the same space as shown on the 1911 plan. This space will serve as an outdoor garden room within the landscape. The main western lawn is to remain open and pastoral. The existing swimming pool and pool house are to be removed to allow for the restoration of the southeast corner of the landscape. The swimming pool is to be replaced by a small lily pool, which is in keeping with the original intent of the 1911 plan. The garden spaces surrounding the proposed lily pool are to be planted with a combination of evergreen trees, deciduous shrubs, which will help reestablish the privacy screening in this corner of the property. The entry drive is to remain as it is presently. However, we hope to one day consider reestablishment of the double-loaded configuration of the original plan. The drive court in the front of the house is to be renovated using traditional materials, including reclaimed granite cobbles and limestone steps, which were part of the original entry scheme. And finally, the original garden plan was developed using classical and Beaux-Arts principles of axial relationships to structure the landscape into a series of delightful and enchanting garden rooms. The proposed plan, as shown in this exhibit, has been developed in the same spirit with the intent of creating a unified house and garden combination. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll have our staff report next, and then we'll ask questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peretz. This item is continued from the Commission's February meeting. The Commission also reviewed a restoration project and addition for the main house last June, I believe, and the construction is currently underway on that project. At the February meeting, the Commission really struggled with approving the demolition of the pool houses that were designed by Ike Colburn without a clear plan of how the property would be restored and what the proposed pool would look like and how this change on the property will affect the historic integrity of the property itself. During the time between February and now, the petitioner has done a lot of research. They've provided more information, including an analysis on alternative uses for the pool house on the property, relocating it to various areas on the property and providing pros and cons of each of those scenarios, ultimately coming to the conclusion that in order to restore this property back to the 1911 plan that really goes back to the origins of the house, the pool house, they're requesting demolition of the pool house and pool. The petitioner also reached out to local organizations to try to find a home, as Ms. Harris described earlier. There's some correspondence in your packets that reflect that. But given the primary objective to restore the property back to the early 1900s, using documentation from that period, the criteria for demolition appear to be met. There's no doubt that this has been a challenging petition, that the pool houses are architecturally interesting, but given the careful thought that has been put into the restoration plan, staff is forwarding a positive recommendation to approve this project. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great, thank you, Maggie. Do we have any questions? This is a nice proposal that you've given us. I think one of the things we were struggling with last time was the level of detail that we have here. And also, I think that we were struggling with the speed of the consideration for this house, so for this pool house. But I think it's benefited from having some time to digest this. I think we appreciate both the time and the additional information. I don't know if we have comments. It's a very nice plan. I do have one question on the landscape plan. Am I seeing landscaping that's crossing the property line to the south on this plan?
The planting that you're seeing in the southwest corner of the planting that you're seeing in the southwest corner of the property is the screening that exists on the adjacent property.
I see. Thank you.
I just have a question. What exactly is being put in place? I see of where the pool is now. I see the landscape plan, but is that a smaller pool that's going to be being placed there?
This is the location of the
Right.
proposed pool, the proposed lily pool.
Okay. Do we
And,
have an illustration of a better illustration of that in the packet, or?
We do not have an illustration of the proposed lily pool, but its intent is to be the exact same size and proportion of the pool that was shown in the 1911 plan.
Okay, and what is the dimensions of that?
I would say it's probably about 20 feet by 10 feet. And it would be flush limestone coping in the ground
Okay.
with water plants within it.
Okay, thanks, that's all I have.
Question?
Well, I just had a thought, is that Lily Pond, there's a couple of Shaw Gardens still around town, and there's one over at the House of the Four Winds that has a lot of water features, and that coping stone actually, it's interesting the way they handled that back in the day. It wasn't necessarily just a flat cut stone section. It would have a bit of a concave and then a convex curve, so that it started out a little lower, maybe near the water, or maybe it was the opposite way, near the grass, and it would slowly curl back up and then bend around again. And that exquisite little touch almost becomes more interesting than the pool in some cases. So that might be worth investigating. I think Mr. Redmond would be more than happy to let you have his property to look at something like that. I just offer that as a little
Sounds
extra.
great. It's a wonderful suggestion.
A question regarding the pool house. I personally did not have a problem with it being removed on the basis that it wouldn't have been allowed to be built. At the time it was built, had there been a Historic Preservation Commission and had there been a need for a certificate of appropriateness, I felt that it was, I guess maybe an overly strong word, but an aberration at the time that it was placed on the property with respect to its context. But I think it's a very gracious offer that has been made tonight, or we're hearing about tonight, to relocate it at the owner's expense. That is really going beyond the call of duty, I think. But I think it's excellent for those who do value it somewhere else and have it somewhere else and appreciate it there. And my question is there a kind of a window within which this can happen? In other words, obviously if you had to wait 3 years for someone to accept the offer, you wouldn't be implementing your plan for 3 years. So is there a time frame that is important for people to know about?
Charles can probably speak to this, but we have, it's fast. I mean, we're hoping to spend Christmas in the house if we can. So it's pretty fast.
Well, we're very definitely well underway, obviously, of the renovation of the house, and the notion is that the landscape implementation, we were hoping to obviously nail down the times when the hard construction of the landscape would go forward, and we'd be able to implement the planting. Obviously, we'd love to do quite a bit of planting this fall, reestablish that portion of the property, and not miss another growing season. So the thought was that we would like to try and implement our plans for the most part this fall. But I don't think that precludes your suggestion of somehow salvaging it in a very restricted time frame. I think that can be done.
Thank you.
Did it mention in there that you've had a chance to discuss the landscape screening with the neighbor to the south?
I'm not sure it mentioned, Mr. Berg, I'm not sure that it mentioned it in the report, but I can tell you that I personally have had that conversation with Mrs. Chandler on site, this notion of reestablishing the screening. It's an interesting, obviously, if you look at the original plan, you can see that that's the public side of this house. And that goes back to one of the reasons why putting a pool house there, if we ever asked about it today, we probably wouldn't be granted that. Our intention is to reestablish the pastoral character and parkland character of the east side of this house, which is really an integral part of the original plan and the intent of many of these great house and garden combinations at Lake Forest. So the screening, to answer your question very directly, the screening in that part of the garden will be much greater than it is presently.
And at the pool as well?
And very definitely at the pool. And we do have a drawing in the packet which shows several layers of screening around the proposed pool.
All right, do we have other questions? Otherwise, then we have the portion of the meeting which is dedicated for any public testimony. If there's any public comments on this, please come on up and state your name.
I would like to say something.
Sure, I think we have one person coming first. Go ahead, and then come on up after that. Thank you.
Okay, I am Pauline Moore, and I'm on the Board of Directors of the Preservation Foundation, and I'm not here to object to the demolition of the pool house, but I just want to point out some principles of historic preservation that I think are being missed, and I picked two of these things out of the staff report that I want to make clear. First of all, it says that the pool house was not considered a contributing structure to the North Green Bay Road National Register District. That had to be because it wasn't 50 years old at the time. And I don't want to make an assumption that if we were doing that district today, because it was the Preservation Foundation that plotted and described and carried that nomination to the state for approval. So I'm not going to assume that it would be considered contributing today, but it might have. The second thing in the staff report that caught my eye was this. The pool house does not rank on the same scale as other works by I. Colburn, such as the award-winning McLennan House on Lake Road. I just wouldn't like people to think that for something to be worthy of historic preservation, it has to be on a grand scale. Think about Shaw, who designed the small, humble worker houses in Marktown. They are as treasured as his large estate homes. And think of Frank Lloyd Wright, his famous or infamous Cheney House in Oak Park is no more revered than his Usonian cottages. So I may find reasons to demolish the pool house, but those should not be part of your reasons. The other and last thing I would like to say is that we call it historic preservation because it's history. And history is a narrative. So buildings, built structures, our streetscapes tell stories. And no one has considered the story that this pool house tells, and you may or may not value it, but at least you should consider it. And then the last thing I would say, I didn't come here to say it, but Mr. Walters said today this would never be approved. Actually, those projects had to be reviewed by the Building Review Board, and which was a little different from historic preservation, but they did review historic buildings and structures, additions, and so forth. And I know that there were battles over some of I. Colburn, his own home that was built on Lake Road. There was a lot of discussion of that, but it did get approved. So we can't make the assumption that it would never be approved today. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have next, please.
Well, I am Clarissa Chandler.
Please come up to the microphone. The one by the podium, I think, is working the best. Thank you. We have, we're broadcasting to folks at home too, so
You're
if we
what?
use it's on TV too, so so if we speak in the microphone, everyone can hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
I am Clarissa Chandler, who lived at 902 for a number of years. My grandfather built the place in 1910. I grew up at 880, spending a good deal of my youth down there, and I feel that the existing pool is historical because it may not have been put in the same year that the place was, but it certainly was there 2 or 3 years later. And there was a playhouse that was my mother's playhouse, which also was used as a changing. It had shower and dressing rooms and a lavatory, and then inside there was a fireplace, and there was a sort of a porch with an awning over it where we sat by the pool. The other side of the pool, where Ike Coburn's dressing room house part is, there was a chain fence, a fence right along there, and there was a garden on that side of the pool. And there's a piece of around sort of what you call it, about this big, it's cement, which was moved over to the northwest side of the house, where I believe it still is, at the time that the Coburn pool houses were built. I do not feel, although he was my brother-in-law, I do not feel that those pool houses, those Coburn pool houses, are of great historical significance. In fact, they had to be rebuilt several times because of bricks disintegrating and all. So I don't think there's any problem with taking those out if the owners want to do that. But I feel very strongly that putting a swimming pool down where the tennis court is will be very disruptive to us, it's right on top of the house that we purposely built down there so that we would never impinge on the living areas and terraces and pool, as we thought, of the new owners of the house. Now, the pool is going to be right down there in where the tennis court is, and we are not in favor of that. But it's also right near Open Lands is right west of that. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
But, well, except that we understood when we sold the house that they were very much interested in taking it back to its original state, but that doesn't seem to be happening in many cases there. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comments, please.
Hello, Arthur Miller, 169 Wildwood Road, and I'm just absorbing what Mrs. Chandler was saying. I would want to speak in favor of how important I.W. Coburn was, not only in this community, but across the country, doing lots of buildings and projects. Also to point out that Mrs. Chandler's sister has deposited at the, in the collections of the Art Institute's Department of Architecture and Design all of the drawings for his projects. As far as I can tell, everything is there. I don't know if anybody's checked to see, but I see that there's something in the recommendation that suggests that we should be doing careful as-built drawings. If there are real drawings, that would be a step up, especially since I once had as-built drawings done. They tore the end of my house off in February, and it didn't match when they went to set it back together. So we'd be better off with the original plans if we can possibly, if indeed they're available there. But he is an excellent architect. There have been before this committee, before there have been reports, I think, of the issues that revolve around some of the construction that I.W. Coburn made. And one of the things to remember is that in the middle of the 20th century, starting with Le Corbusier in about 1927, he was suggesting how similar houses should be in the middle of in the 20th century to boats, airplanes. He did a book called Toward a New Architecture, boats, ships, and airplanes. And implied in that is a certain amount of obsolescence, and that they weren't always built to be as permanent as always. Some of the mid-century architecture just wasn't made to last a full 50 years, engineering-wise. Mr. Coburn's own house, which many of us have wrung our hands over the difficulties that were at 700 North Lake Road. He himself took down a tower that was perhaps a little shaky when he moved away. And then later the walls didn't go down to 42 inches and had to come down. It didn't go down to the frost line. So maybe he didn't always worry about these things being entirely permanent, but they would last for a generation. And I think that's consistent with some of that I'm not saying that every mid-century house wasn't built to last, but I'm saying that there were some structures that were not meant to necessarily be permanent. And someone might be better, if they really wanted those pool houses, they might be better off to get the drawings from the Art Institute, start from scratch, new materials, maybe have somebody look at maybe making sure those materials are the appropriate strength, and then starting over to have those I.W. Coburn kind of pool houses. I guess I can't speak to the other parts about the history of the landscape there. I mean, we obviously know that Mr. Stick is an excellent architect, well known in this community for his work. I know we are always sensitive to issues of neighbors and things that would be disruptive to their life, and so that I think has to be given some serious thought. But it looks like what he has in mind is attractive, but if there is an issue about this pool being historic further back than the pool houses, and if there's an issue about noise, it certainly needs careful consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comments, testimony? And I see none, so this is the opportunity for commission to deliberate if we have items to deliberate.
Well, I think I'd start out, maybe, Mr. Commissioner, by saying that we've certainly heard about this petition, I think, quite a bit, and can formulate our decision based on a lot of different sources of information. I feel very confident that the removal of the pool houses as they are now is something I could be supportive of. I think that the overall intent to take this back to a certain era kind of resonates with me, and that would be an era that would be before Coburn. And it's consistent with what they've tried to do with the main house by removing some of those additions that weren't necessarily sympathetic. The idea of the Lily pool in the location of the present pool now, I mean, I can understand that desire and that intimacy, and I feel that that's consistent with even Shaw's diagrammatic plans of the early part of the century. With regard to the new swimming pool, I'm not quite sure, maybe staff can even give us some information on that, if that's something that we as a Preservation Commission necessarily deliberate on. I mean, if it's meeting variance, if it doesn't need a variance, if it meets the ordinances, is that something that we actually decide is implemented or not? And maybe Kathy could speak to that, or Megan.
I will say that the proposed location of the pool does meet zoning setbacks. I'm trying to flip to the page now. Zoning requires a 20-foot setback, and I believe this is almost 38 feet from the property line. What the commission should look at is the appropriateness of locating a pool in this part of the property in the grand scheme of the restoration plan, and is it appropriate for the removal of the tennis court and the replacement of the tennis court with a pool? And is there an alternative location that would work better from a historic preservation standpoint?
Thank you, Megan.
Speak. I would echo Commissioner Berg's comments, but I would like to ask a question also related to that. The pool we're talking about, there's on page 19 an Exhibit H. I'm not sure who would answer this, but there's it says the caption says proposed swimming pool area elements, and it's a very attractive picture. It's obviously taken somewhere else, but this is the imagery and the feature shows the features that presumably would be a part of the pool design. Is that correct? Because I think that's a part of evaluating what it's going to be.
That's absolutely right. And the notion is that we were planning on, this is a plan of the swimming pool showing an evergreen hedge that will be surrounding the entire pool. As Megan said, the setbacks exceeded by almost twice its requirement, 38 feet as opposed to a 20-foot setback. And the notion is that on the south side of that swimming pool, outside the hedge, we'd create a large evergreen screening. I'd also like to point out in this diagram the proximity to the adjacent property. The pool is closest to the service side of the house that is next door. It is not next to the terraces or the what I would consider the everyday living space. This is a section through the swimming pool as proposed. The evergreens that are shown on the left-hand side of this drawing are the existing evergreens, which are actually on a berm that the Chandlers kindly planted. We plan to do the same thing on our side of the property line to enhance that screening. And this is an example of what we're talking about in terms of the vocabulary of the design of the pool. Very little paving around it, an evergreen hedge surrounding it, and the large evergreen trees outside that as another layer of screening. This is what is there now. I would say if I was trying to enjoy open lands, I'd rather look at an evergreen hedge than a 12 or 15 foot decrepit tennis court fence. But that's my opinion.
Thank you. Well, my response or comment would be that it's an improvement of the area, obviously, I mean, environmentally, and the issue, however, is Mrs. Chandler's concern of perhaps what you might consider a nuisance of having a pool. It doesn't scream out that it's a nuisance. The only nuisance perhaps would be a pool party that was noisy. But environmentally, visually, it's extremely attractive in terms of how it's handling the landscape and its features and so on. So I guess that's the only issue left, is how the owners intend to, in fact, use it.
Should I respond to that?
Sure.
I did talk to Mrs. Chandler the other day about this.
Please, could you?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry.
She did let me know that she was going to come and protest the pool being here, and we did, when we were looking at the restoration of the landscape, we did look at other options for the pool because their other neighbors, when they lived in the original house at 902, the neighbors to the north built a pool very close to the property line, and I know the noise from that pool was something that they're still very, very concerned with. You know, it's hard to say. If you go back to the picture that we were just looking at with the whole overhead landscape view where you can see, so see where the tennis court is now? Even in the original drawings, that is a pretty open area. So our feeling was putting the pool there would not it kind of tucks it away. So you have this perfectly, hopefully, well-restored area, and this pool tucked away in a place that even in the original 1911 drawing was an open space. The place that Mrs. Chandler had suggested we put the pool was the garden, which you can see at the top of the screen. Well, the garden is original. It is not interior, it is not the original design, but the exterior is the original footprint of the garden. And my belief was, nor did I want to touch that garden, I'll be totally honest, but had we known her concerns in advance, we could have looked at that garden and maybe keeping the exterior and putting the pool in the middle of it. But when we purchased the house, in the agreement, that little foot that sticks off into open lands, it says in our contract that if we don't continue to use that in the same way it's being used now, that land is no longer ours. So that made me believe that the garden was sacred. Don't touch the garden. So we never really truly looked at putting the pool there. So when we did the renovations to the home, and the screen porch is actually built right now and standing to look down through the garden and out onto open lands. So in as much as I would like to say we would consider putting the pool there, the whole house has been, the structure that's already built is built with the intention that the pool is not there. So I did talk to Mr. and Mrs. Chandler, and I said, look, we are your neighbors. We understand that you want to eat lunch. They eat lunch, and they live, obviously, in and around their house. There is that whole, their compost heap is there, their driveway, their back buildings. But I understand that noise carries from what would be a children's party. I did say to them, look, if you tell, if we're going to have a kids' party, you tell us the windows you guys are going to be out there. If you're going to be having lunch out there, if this is a big day, or we can give you forewarning, we can not do it then. We can move the timing around. I mean, we are your neighbors. We'll work with you on that. And she did, once again, say that they really don't like the sound of children in the back. And she'd much rather have all the play and the noise be in the front, which is hard because that is an open space. And we've really done the best we can do. And we did walk back there, and I said, look, you all can pick the screening. Charles flew in, and he was going to meet with her, and we were going to talk about the screening for that area, and basically said, we'll put in whatever you want. Just let us know what that is. So other than that, I don't know what else we can do.
Okay, thank you. Other deliberations, if any? I think I would like to just mention a couple things about some of the comments, both with respect to whether or not it was on the records as a contributing structure. I can tell that I'm not in the microphone. And also in terms of the scale of this. And I know that those are in the staff report. I also know that we're not basing our decision based on whether it's characterized as a contributing structure or not. It's certainly an important part of the information, but I think for us, we're looking at the overall solution, and that's why we struggled so much at the last meeting, because we needed the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. So I think that we've got them now. I think I'm quite enthusiastic about the solution. I appreciate the concern of the neighbor, but I think we see that quite often. I think that can be mitigated both with the screening and both with just being good neighbors. So I'm fine with it myself. I don't know.
Fine with it.
Yeah, I agree. If the goal appears to be historic restoration, I don't see it making much sense to place the pool in any other place and keep it with the other gardens that are being planned. So, being a good neighbor, putting up proper screening is something that we would hope that all the homeowners in the community would consider foremost, and we trust that will occur, and I trust that will occur in this situation. So
I'm going to ask if anyone has a motion for me based on those deliberations.
Well, I'm going to just put in. I'm behind the removal of the pool house, and the idea of a lily pad instead of the. I mean, I'm all for that. There's just something about putting the pool there that's just not quite falling in place for me. And I'm not sure. There already is a tennis court, and it does have the high fence. I agree that that's a vertical element that actually is probably less desirable maybe than the clear view over a pool. But I don't know, just in the disposition of a new object, that we're putting it in there, I don't know, there's something about it that just seems lopsided in the weight of the land plan itself. The openness of open land spilling out there, I don't know, I guess it's just there's a frequency with the activity of a pool, and it just doesn't seem quite there for me. And I'm just saying this because I have a feeling that I'm going to be a minority, but I'd almost like there to be more thought about that pool. And I know that it's growing late, and the petitioners have done a spectacular job with so much of this, and I just think they're the greatest new people in town. But at the same time, I'm just looking at the proximity to the newer home of the Chandlers, in the story of the site, and it doesn't quite seem like it's elegant enough for me. Pure gut reaction, and I'm sorry, because I know.
So you're not going to make my motion, huh? You know, Guy, I look at it from the point of view of how the property is being used and what the utility of that corner of the site is. It's a recreational use now. It's going to be a recreational use that will be more, probably even more well done than it is now. And it doesn't, to me, it doesn't feel like the most permanent aspect of the solution in any event, although the pool that's in the front has been there a long, long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I just think that in relationship to what else is going on in the house, if you were going to put a pool somewhere, that's where I would put it. And I don't know that it's any worse use of that property than the tennis court. So it strikes me as a benign element, actually. I think that it's already screened from the home, if you will. I appreciate the nuisance factor that a pool,
Yeah.
Pools are allowed in Lake Forest.
Oh, no, I was actually rather hoping we weren't going to have to make a decision on it. That's why I asked Kathy, because it would be a really nice way for us not to have to be responsible for it. And I'm actually really glad that you described it in some more supplemental detail, Kurt, because you're absolutely right. And maybe this is good that I pried it out of you a little bit more, because I think it needs to be stated. I guess that when I look at that site plan, it looks more like it's the pool for the Chandler's house than it does for the main house. And I guess that's just my diagrammatic nature and so forth. So I'm not trying to unconvince you at all. I'm applauding you for actually being
So,
full
Guy,
of resolve on it.
Are you suggesting that it should be oriented east to west as opposed to north to south, just because of the way it responds to the house?
I don't know. I mean, if you can put up the site plan again, maybe we can talk our way through this a little bit more, and then we'll forever hold our pieces, so.
Well, I appreciate how sensitive the Harrises have been to the open lands requests to use that little elbow piece the way they have. And I understand how that probably scared you into, you know, what should we use this spot for? You didn't want to lose that little piece of land sticking out. So I'd like to hear more about what Open Land said to you in regards to that little piece and losing it. It would scare me too.
Actually, it wasn't Open Lands. What we talked about with Open Lands, which we are thrilled for them to do, is there's a whole road that runs along the north piece of the property. It's an access road to Open Lands. That will remain as it is, an access road. Open Lands had nothing to do with that little piece that sticks out.
Okay,
Mrs. Chandler didn't
okay.
want us to use it for anything else.
Okay.
And
So
that's what
Open
made
Lands wouldn't let you keep it if you used it for something other than the garden.
Well, and that's what sort of made me think this you can't touch. No, it was the Chandlers.
Oh, okay.
But the only thing about the pool, just one last thing about the pool, is it's hard when you're looking at the tennis court view. I think it's a harder thing. I think this is a better image because the tennis court, the footprint is going to be much, much smaller. As you can see here, everything surrounding that pool will be grass and will be green. And it is actually, when you look at the tennis court comes much closer to the property line than the actual physical pool. So I think this is a little bit fairer of an overhead view of the pool than the other one, because the tennis court is obviously a huge hulking thing. I mean, it seems that way now. And this footprint in terms of sheer cement is much, much smaller. I'll stay up here in case there are any other questions.
Do we have any more questions?
No, I just really
Good.
appreciate what you've done
Yeah.
to try to restore the property as well.
Thank
You
you.
really should be commended for doing this.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do you want a motion?
Well, I actually asked for one.
I would move to approve the petition as proposed based on the findings of the staff report and conditioned on the conditions in the staff report.
Thanks for the motion, Chairman, or Commissioner Ransom. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Moyer. Do I have a vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
We have one opposing vote, and this passes. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
All right. I think you're right. I think you're right. All right, thanks, folks. Our next project is a request for certificate of appropriateness approving the restoration work at the train station at the Central Business District. And I don't believe we have any ex parte conflicts. I hope no one's here from the train station.
Talked to the conductor today,
I
but
see none, so if we can have do we have a representative to give this report?
Good evening. I'm Gunny Harbo of Harbo Architects, here to explain the project to you all. I think, let's, it's not a videotape, but we'll get some images up. You have all this in your packet. I just thought it would be easier to show everyone what we're talking about. So I think as you're all familiar, our firm prepared a historic structure report several years ago about the station that the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation had funded with the idea in mind of restoring the station. And the city has gotten some funding to begin that process. It's not enough money to do the whole restoration, but it is enough money to get the project started. So where we've started with is the restoration of the roof, putting the slate roof back on the building, most notably with the dormers and some other alterations to the roofscape. The second part of that would be the wood and stucco restoration, and the third part would be the masonry restoration of the station and the warming house. So to start with the roof, this is a historic image of the original Frost and Granger design. And of course, we're talking, a lot of the focus is on these two dormers here and on the other side. We're also talking about the sheds that were altered, not there, here and here, that element, that were altered when they were foreshortened and they were made into gable ends. And I'll have a picture of that in a minute. Using this historic drawing and photographs, we were able to redesign these elements in order to restore it back to what it looked like when it was first constructed in 1900. The station itself, as I mentioned, the main focus is on reconstructing the dormers that were removed. There's also an element here that will be removed and to restore this back to its original character. While I have this image here, I'll mention that the future masonry restoration project will include repointing of the building. It has lost this original effect. You can see that there's a different color mortar surrounding this windows here and up here, and on the corners there's sort of a coin effect that has been created by using two different color mortars, and that'll be restored as well. This is an image just from a few years later that we also used just to show how quickly the vines took over the whole thing. The nasty vines that don't do good things for masonry buildings. This is an element that we used in order to inform us about what the original casement windows for the dormers would look like. And so our proposal is to replicate those based on this. And these are just the drawings. Here I'm showing the proposed selected demolition. It is on the, this is the station portion. Here's the element over where the bank window is, that this would be cut back to its original location and the ends restored. These are the protective sheds, if you will, that have been have a gable end on them. Those will be brought back to the original hip condition. Same thing on the warming house. And there's a little funny gable that was added in the renovation that was previously done, and that'll be removed as well. I'll show you a photograph of those in a second. And then this is the proposed design with the 4 new dormers, this end repaired, these 4 ends restored. Here's a proposed design of the dormer itself. Again, based on the drawing and the photographs, you can note that it has sort of a nice little swoop to it, both here and there's a break in the slope of the roof. It is all covered with slate, and in the dormer itself has slate siding on it. This is just another image of a section through. I will point out that the proposal is that this right now is roofed over, and these never really functioned as open dormers. There's no real need for them, so they will be merely attached to the existing roof sheathing. And this is a detail section through the platform roof. Some of the details of what has to happen there. Again, more details of the dormers. This image shows the maybe a little more clearly what the demolition, the selected demolition aspects are. Here you see the little portion of this roof that has to be removed. Here's a detail of it. This is what the new, this end of it will look like, which is the original condition. That'll be replicated on the other side. This is the dormer, the extension of the roof gable that was added that faces west. And part of this work includes some of the wood restoration. There may be more to follow, and that includes some of these rotted elements that are associated with the actual roof and that have some structural integrity issues relative to the roof that need to be done in this first phase. And these are the structural drawings. That's it for the images. So that's really the scope. This is a sample of the proposed slate.
All right. If that's it for your presentation, we'll ask the staff for comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Peretz. This is really an exciting project for the community. I think it was several years ago. Obviously, if you look at the train station today, it's in need of work. And part of the complication is that the city does not own the train station. The station is owned by the Union Pacific Railroad. Metra has a lease to use a portion of the site, and the city has had a lease. And over the past 12 to 18 months, the city has been working to renegotiate that lease with Union Pacific in the interest of really assuring that the city is going to have some control over the property going forward. At the same time, the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation funded the study done by Mr. Harbaugh's firm that really set the stage both for identifying the existing conditions as well as identifying and making recommendations for what type of restoration work would be appropriate. With that report, the city, after a few attempts, was successful in getting grant funding, along with the grant funding of, I believe, about $800,000. The city will contribute money, and Metra will be contributing some money. Donations from anyone in the community are also welcome. From the commission, it's also welcome. But with the money available, the highest priorities have really been identified, and the intent is to do as much of the restoration work as possible. The highest priority is restoration of the roof. And as you heard, the roof will be restored to slate, at the same time restoring the various roof elements that were original. If money allows, the second priority will be restoration of, repair and restoration of the wood and stucco elements on the exterior of the structure. And the third priority is the masonry restoration. Don't know if the current funds will allow us to do all of that, but they will be attacked in that order. But there is hope that once work gets started on the train station, that additional grants, additional funding will be available, and that ultimately we'll be able to do a complete restoration, both exterior and interior. What is before you tonight is a request for a certificate of appropriateness for just those first three high priority items, to allow work on the roof to proceed, restoration of the roof elements as the first priority, the wood and stucco restoration, and the masonry restoration. The conditions provided to you will require that that work be done consistent with the report that has been prepared, in consultation with the city's consultant, Mr. Harbo. We certainly will involve the foundation in review of the work going forward, since they really have been such an integral part in restoring the station in the past and in setting the stage for this restoration project as well. Any work beyond the three priorities identified would come back to the commission as really a separate project, and a separate certificate of appropriateness would be issued. But we felt that it was appropriate to come forward with this first piece now that the funding's available. Because it is a community project, to keep the commission informed, we would do periodic status reports to the commission. That way also informing the community, because it will be publicly done on TV. Staff does support approval of a certificate of appropriateness and would welcome any questions.
Great, it's a wonderful project. We have lots of questions, so I'll dig right in. I understand the scope being approved tonight is just the outside, just those first three items, slate, mason. But if maybe you could keep a list of these questions, and we'll see who's the most important to answer this. I'm curious about the status of the drive-through, whether or not that's included in this, whether or not that would go away. What's the status of that? Also, the status of the bike shelter, because those two elements are kind of freestanding elements, not clear in this proposal what happens to those. The color of the slate roof, I'm curious where that comes from, what that's trying to mimic or match, or how we arrived at that color. Also, if we would ever see the interior of this, if that ever gets done. And signage, whether signage would be replaced. Signage is currently on the gabled end for the Lake Forest signage when you come into the station, and I see in some of the historic photos there's signage on top of the hip roof, so I'm wondering if that's part of the approval or if that comes back to us. And then when we get to the detail of the construction of the hip roof, I see that it's shown as a 12-inch overhang, and I'm sure we can have the architect explain to us the geometry of that, but I'm concerned about the two large trees that are on the west side of the tracks on either end of the roof, because to my eye, if the hip is extended to the same overhang as the other side of it, the east or west overhang, those trees are in the way. So we'll get an explanation of that from the architect. But let's just see if there's other questions on the list before we dig into them. How about you folks? Any other?
Has there been any fishing for how far we can go with the available funds we have now? I mean, how much can be expected to be accomplished? Is that which direction should I throw that out?
Well, let's finish the list. We won't ever finish the list,
Okay.
but is that if
And
that's,
I can start, and then I will
why don't you
throw-
go ahead and dig in on those? That'll give us something to chew on while we're.
The drive-through and the bike shelter, as part of this request that's coming before you, there is not a proposal to remove either of those. It's talked about, and it changes almost daily. Until very recently, we were expecting that the drive-through would be removed, because there was not a tenant. That may be changing So this project as presented does not include the removal of those two elements. If those were to be removed, that would come back before you as separate pieces. I'm going to let the architect address the color of the slate.
Thank you.
The interior of the station. My thought is, because this is a community project, that we would continue to keep the commission informed, and although you wouldn't have the purview to issue a certificate of appropriateness for the interior of the station today, I think it's important, just for the community discussion and to keep the community informed, that that piece would also come before you. Remember that the City Council recently amended the preservation chapter to provide for designation of interior spaces. The council has directed staff to bring forward 2 city spaces, one being this room, the other being, I think, the hay barn at Aloha Farm. We haven't done that yet, but potentially as the station is restored and as you consider that, that might be something that the council could direct in the future if in fact the community came up with sufficient funds to do interior restoration. Signage, a good point, and we didn't identify that, but my sense is that we would bring signage back to you separately. Obviously, the signage would need to be altered with the restoration of the hipped roof, so that would come back to you separately. I will let the architect talk about the detail of the construction on the hip roof. The 2 trees are something that we'll need to look at. And then Commissioner Berg, in response to your question, again, I think maybe Dan Martin can speak more directly to it, but I think at this point we're looking to get through the work on the roof first. There may or may not be money to go into the restoration of the wood, stucco, and masonry, but we aren't confident that the money we have at hand is going to allow us to fully address all 3 of those items.
Okay, I think for me there was 2 questions: the slate and the alteration of the hip roof. The slate is very close to a slate that we found in the attic. I should have brought it with me, so I apologize for that. It's a non-fading black slate, which was common at the time, and that's what we based that on. So that's where that came from. Obviously, colored pictures, we don't have any colored pictures. So the question of the dormer, I mean of the hip roofs, it won't affect anything because we are not extending this at all. It's, in fact, it's remaining, this outline remains, and all that happens is that this becomes a hip roof as opposed to a gabled roof. So if anything, it's taking up less space.
So the column would still end up at the very end of the hip. But right now there's a column at the end of the gable.
Yeah.
Right there, that column is...
Yeah. We're not moving the columns. Is it right at the, yeah, you're right, it is right at the thing. So it will extend, you're right, I'm sorry, you are right. It will extend, have to extend the distance that thing goes out in order to do that.
Right, so I think when you see that on the site, you'll see that there's two large, I want to say they're honey locusts, but there might be something else. Dan would know probably. But they're, and I don't think we have a good picture of them here. I almost took a picture today for you.
Okay.
But they're very proximate to the, I mean, so much so that I think 2 feet would work, 3 feet might not. You know, it's
okay. Well,
something
we'll
to
have to.
check.
I apologize for.
Yeah.
They should be showing up on the drawing, but they're not. So.
And then one thing that kind of complicates that, if you don't mind this little dialogue here, is that there is room to the north to relocate the tree for, you know, it's a big tree, but to plant another tree. To the south, there's no room. It turns into parking very quickly.
Right.
So it begs the question whether or not the hip roof is really worth the effort. I understand it's historic and it would be nicer, and it almost, you know, I'm not sure. I don't know that I have enough perspective on whether the gable is good or the hip is good to opine about which is better. I wouldn't argue with restoring it to the original hip condition, but I think you got to look at that tree.
Okay.
So. Guy, did you get your question answered? Okay.
Well, you actually kind of segued into an interesting thought I had about money, and about how much we can afford to do to this building as quickly as possible, because there's a lot of the building that's in pretty bad shape. I think the wood particularly is somewhat precarious in certain aspects, that it could start to just have dry rot riddle through a lot of it. And of course, there's a great deal of masonry that needs to be attended to as well. And actually, these hips that you talked about, Kurt, originally they extended much further out than the ends of the gables.
There were I can't remember how much further out, but a number of
they were chopped
structural
off.
bays that were cut off.
They were cut off so that we see the extruded end as our gable. It's not that we're putting these hips back on exactly where they were. So it's a little bit like the petition before. We're taking it back, but we're not taking it back, sort of, in that regard. That's why I was asking for, one of the few times I bring budget up at these things, is just that I see the station as in really some, a state, it's probably the worst station on the North Shore line now as far as condition. It's in really bad shape. I mean, even the interior floor, if you had a walker, I think if I had a relative, I would make sure to tell them 4 times, don't trip and break your neck in the lobby floor, you know. And we're putting dormers back on the roofs, and I'm just wondering.
Well, the roof is failing, so
I know we
think
need to stop the leaking,
right,
and so forth. So I guess
that was why that was picked as
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
and my highest priority.
Right.
Kind of a critical path, if you will.
Yes, I see from the top down.
Be able to waterproof.
Yeah, I understand that better than you can imagine. So I like all that I see. I just wonder how much can we gobble up, you know, with our limited budget. That's my main concern.
Well, I think we'll know more when we get
Bids?
Yeah.
All right, well, I think.
As far as how far we can go, I'm sorry, just to address that question, we have $1.2 million, and we know that, you know, at least 600 is going to take it into effect with just the roof restoration and bringing it back to slate. And then we'll go to priority 2 with restoration and stucco restoration, and hit the priorities there and bid that out and go as far as, our intent is to continue until all of the raised money of 1.2 million is spent on the exterior of the building.
So we'll have about half left after the roof, hopefully.
Yes.
And
Our
yeah.
estimates were based on maybe not some of the alterations and what we were doing, and, you know, now we're trying to, you know, we're concerned about fuel prices and where that price is going to come in. We haven't bid it out yet, so that's our estimate at this point.
Yeah, thank you.
And then if the bike shelter stayed and/or the drive-through stayed, would you also do those roofs in slate to match this?
I believe we have the bike storage rack, the storage for the bike storage, excuse me, is part of the project. We have not, just as staff mentioned, the keeping of the drive-through has kind of come up late, so that was not originally part of the project. As you can see, it's not on the drawings.
Yeah.
So we would have to come back and readdress that, but we don't
Thanks.
have, that's not part of it right now.
Thank you. How about other questions before public comments?
Yeah, Fred?
No questions.
You know, I'll throw one more question out about the slate, because it'll slip my mind later. You know, it just seems that whenever you're picking that slate out, it's always a cold bucket of water in the face if you don't really take into account how it looks with the brick. The combination of the color of your slate and the color of your brick, and maybe we found something in the attic, but I'm assuming there's going to be a palette of the materials that you use to make a final decision on the slate, as far as that goes, and
Yeah, we can do that for you.
maybe make a note of that in the minutes or something, because that would be a horrible oversight if we didn't try to do that. Because it's a unique color brick on this station too. I mean, all those old bricks are of a distinctive quality.
So thanks for that, Guy. I think the other thing I was thinking is that we have a precedent across the street with Market Square that has quite a different kind of slate palette with a model color, a lot of variation in color. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that it should be the same as that, but I was just curious how the conclusion came, so that's why I asked that question.
Just 1 second to that. I mean, if you look at this, these photographs, of course, they're black and white photographs. It's hard to, there is always a variation in
Yeah,
it, but it's not a very pronounced one.
yeah, I see what you're saying.
So,
Interesting. This building predated Market Square?
this is 1900.
I believe that's right. Yeah, predated Market Square. Thank you. All right, I think we have no other questions for, so I'll ask if there's any public testimony. I think I see at least one. Thank you. Come on up.
Yes, Art Miller, 169 Wildwood Road. Yes, this was the first side of Market Square. The other three sides were added 1915, 1916. The property across the street was purchased in about a week in the summer of 1912, before everybody could figure out what was going on. And it took them 3 plans to come up with something that would work on that space over across the street. But I think that in the case here, we have a place that was built probably for the early Owensia Club horse shows. That was the reason for having a fancy women's room on one side and gentlemen's place on the other side. The station was the first part of that sort of gentrification that came with the Owensia crowd in that started up first partial season in 1896. The architects were Frost and Granger. Frost was an old New Englander. They both had studied at MIT. Granger had studied abroad at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Had worked, done a great deal of classical work. Worked with Jenny. Was kind of a close associate of Shaw. They were kind of on the same page. They know what they were doing, and I don't know that I'm not exactly sure what the slate is across the street. I don't know if it's slate or if it's like slate material. But I think following as closely as we can to this material that's known to be there. I think the theory behind this project is to do something that will last another 80 years. You know, a slate roof will last 100 years. I'm fortunate that I probably won't be around here in another 40 years if this thing starts to fail again, if we don't do all the best work. But I think some of you could be in the unfortunate position of seeing this come around as a boomerang project again if we don't really do it on the quality of the original thing. The floor that Mr. Berg is mentioning was, people tried to stretch the budget further when we first did it, and we have Gail Hodges here who worked very hard on that project in the 80s. And this is, we have to remember, this project was done in another difficult time. The early Reagan years were not exactly a child's garden of wonderful economic times. And that was the period when that restoration was done. So they bought a good generation time, but we want to buy 2 generations, and we want to get this thing restored. The floor needs to be restored, but in good time as well as possible, not temporarily, something that will just be for a few years. So I think that the idea is that we want to get as much as we can from the project, but we want to make sure that everything we do is as good as it can be, up to the standards of Frost and Granger, who were excellent architects, and that we have lots of examples of their work all over town, just as well as Shaw's. And so I think sticking with that notion that this is going to be an 80-year project, we obviously have a problem. We're in a bad economic time now. Where the rest of the money is going to come from, I don't know exactly, but I think that doing this right to start with is critical. I hope that we can do some kind of hipping on those roofs. I'm not sure how that is, but that was the 4th side, and even if it's not as long as to have 15,000 horse show people stored underneath those long things, we would still be able to have the character of that original roof. And I don't know about the trees, and we're very sensitive to trees in town, but if we have an 80-year project here, I don't know how long the tree is going to last. So hopefully 80 years, but maybe it can be creatively trimmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, I'm Diana Melikar, 925 Forest Hill Road. I didn't expect to be up here because I'm actually part of the next petition, but Our office is directly across the street from the train station, and so if there's anybody who's going to benefit from the project, it's going to be us, because we're staring at it 8 hours a day. So we're really excited to see that the dormers are coming back on the roof, because we stare at it all the time and think that the proportions are all wrong. So that'll be great. My question would be how we're dealing with the windows, because the windows face directly east, and so there's sunlight that's going to come right in there, and if those dormers are placed on the roof sheathing, it's, you know, I'm trying to figure out what we would do with the windows, because if you paint them black, then it starts looking a little Disneyland-ish. And I'm not sure whether there's an answer to that tonight, but it's something that would be, I think, important to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public testimony? And I don't see any, so I guess I'll first ask if someone wants to answer that question on the windows. Thank you.
It's a good point. The windows would certainly be accessible, so they could be open from the outside. If it's desired, we can just cut some of the sheathing out on the inside, so you would have access to it. It's just that they don't function. There's no need for them to function.
Yeah,
is the point.
So I think it's a suggestion to think about how that
Yeah,
looks from the outside.
and at night they would be black anyway, because that's an attic space. It never was lit. So whether it's black just for the range to the roof, or whether it goes into a black attic space, I don't think that really has much of a visual impact, but we can look into that.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so we have our public testimony, and we had our questions, and now we need our deliberation if we have any thoughts or comments. You know, it's a great project. Obviously, we'd love to see this get going, and it's in very dire need of it. So that's the good news.
One comment, really in response to Commissioner Berg. At the beginning of the project, we did talk about whether restoring the dormers, for instance, was a good use of money. However, we did receive a grant for this project based on the fact that this was going to be a restoration project. So we do have some obligations to do a true restoration in order to receive that funding. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. That's helpful, Kathy.
Well, I like all that I see.
Go ahead. I just, very briefly, I think it's a wonderful project, and I commend everyone who's been involved with it, with the sensitivity and care with which they're developing the scope and the details.
Yeah, I agree. The only question I have is probably one of the condition of approval based on some of the chair brought up. I hadn't even thought about, changing that to a hip roof if it's gonna affect those trees. Is there anything, are we just gonna leave that out there for the petitioner and the staff to work out? Or are we gonna put in a condition of approval regarding, protection of those trees?
Well,
I just lay that out there. I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but I'm trying to get a sense of what, we want to do as far as that goes.
For myself, I'm comfortable staying silent on that. I think that there's an onus on the city to replace those trees in kind, because that's the requirement when they take those kinds of trees out. If they do, there's also an opportunity that it may be detailed differently and they may avoid the trees. So I'll let them study that and see if is the case. Perhaps, maybe even move a column on. It's not that dire. But at any rate, I think it's something that just bears some measured thought. I like Art Miller's comment. I'll remember that one about the tree grows again. That's probably about a 40-year-old tree there, so it's only half done. But at any rate, I think we're in good hands here in terms of the folks who are looking at this and resolving that question. So I'm confident that they'll do that in a manner that, but I'm happy to, add that condition if someone wants it.
I am concerned about the wood and the rot. The pictures are distressing to me,
Yeah.
and even standing under them, looking up at it, as I did the other day, it's concerning.
Yeah.
So how much, I know that the roof is obviously first, but how much time will there be before we think we can get to the wood, the condition of the wood,
Again,
part of the structure?
based on the availability of funding, and Mr. Martin, correct me if I'm wrong, our intent, in fact, our obligation under the grant is to continue with the work to restore all three priorities, to continue work on all three priorities. So with our expectation that the restoration of the roof is going to take about half the available funding, we would then move very quickly into the wood. So it definitely is the intent that we are going to move quickly through all three priorities to the extent that funding allows.
How long do we think it'll take to get a bid on the work for the wood? When will we know how much?
We're hoping for this fall. We still have to work through the ITEP grant and get approvals all the way through. First and foremost, we want to try and get this roof started in July. And then, so what we'll start doing now is we'll start putting together the documents for the wood and stucco restoration in order to be ready to go to bid for that. And as long as we can get IDOT as ITEP, where the primary our funding is coming from, we'll be ready to move as soon as we get the authorization. And we're hoping to do that in the fall, at least to get some of the, in the biggest sight line, if you will, take care of the problems and go after the priorities as far as where it needs to be addressed the most, where the bare wood, so.
Thank you.
Okay, any other deliberation? I'll ask for a motion.
I would move to grant a certificate of appropriateness for the petition as proposed with the conditions in the staff report.
So moved by Commissioner Ransom, seconded by Commissioner Moyer. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And I see none. Passes unanimous. Thank you. Guess they like that one.
I was going to try to remember to bring it back.
Oh, okay, thank you. Are we next? This is 570 Crab. Yeah. All right, the next motion is a petition is a request for certificate of appropriateness to allow partial demolition in addition to the house at 570 Crabtree Lane. And I'll ask if there's any ex parte conflicts.
Mr. Commissioner, I'd like to ask permission to recuse myself from this petition due to my office's participation in the project.
Thank you, Guy. Appreciate that. We'll send for you at the end. All right, thanks, guys. And I think our representative here is Diana Melcar. I can never say it. Melcar.
Yeah, thank
It looks
you.
different than it sounds.
Just have to wait for it to come up on the screen. Great, thanks, Gavin. Well, I want to thank you for hearing our petition tonight. I'm presenting on behalf of the petitioners, Mr. and Mrs. Norbert Riedel. Loanne Riedel is here as well tonight, so she can answer some questions if you have some of the actual petitioner. Our proposed design is based on the architectural language of the existing home, so I'd like to present our analysis of the home first, then I will present the proposed additions and renovations design. And just for reference, this is the front facade of the home. We can go to the next one, Gavin. Thank you. The existing house was designed in 1982 by the architectural firm of I.W. Colburn and Associates in a transitional modern style. The house has not been altered significantly since it was originally built, and I'm glad to say that it's built well, that we believe, after our last couple of petitions, and that Mr. Adams was probably watching over it very closely. The Riedels would like to make the home more suitable for their family living. Here's an image of the existing first floor plan. The building is composed of 4 brick-walled, gabled-roofed wings, radiating in a pinwheel manner. I will refer to these wings as pods, as each pod is treated architecturally as a distinct box-like unit. Connecting the pods are living spaces that also serve as circulation routes throughout the house. This first floor plan image highlights in green the master bedroom pod on the top left and the guest bedroom pod on the bottom right. Notice how they are remote from one another. There is one more bedroom suite in the home that is even more remote, located on the second floor above the first floor guest bedroom suite. The Riedels do not desire their children's bedrooms to be scattered and distant from one another. This image highlights the kitchen family room pod on the bottom left and the library pod on the top right, both colored in green. Okay, we can go to the next. Thanks. The pods are linked together by the central flat-roofed area of the home, as indicated in yellow. This floor area consists mostly of circulation to the pods. However, the 11-foot wide dining space and the 13-foot 6-inch deep living space have been inserted into these circulation paths. Neither the dining space nor the living space are adequately sized since walkways cut through them. Now I'd like to focus on a few areas of the house that are indicative of typical deficiencies encountered in the home's existing design. First, the living areas are too small, and as I mentioned, double as circulation routes to other destinations in the house. In the family room, there is a meager 9 foot 6 inches from fireplace hearth to kitchen countertop, which is much too narrow to function as a comfortable sitting area. Second, the living spaces surprisingly lack on natural light and views to the beautiful yards beyond. Skylights above compensate for some of the deficiency, but as you can see in the master bedroom area, there is no view to the backyard, nor any natural light in the master closeting and bath area. This is also true in the kitchen family room area. And finally, the home lacks storage and functional spaces that support family living. Presently, there is no mudroom. With 3 growing boys and a dog, as well as a detached garage located across the driveway, the Riedel family really needs a decent mudroom area within the house proper. Now I'll address the exterior architectural style of the house. This elevation of the north side of the house best illustrates its architectural language. All building forms are simple and repetitive. Each pod is simple in form, with unadorned brick wall surfaces and capped with a gable-style asphalt shingle roof. In between each pod are the flat roof connections. Exposed walls of the flat roof building mass are composed mostly of glass with stucco fascias above. On a different note, I'd like you to notice that this facade faces the beautiful rear yard, but offers no views of it from either the master bedroom or kitchen family room pod. We propose to add fenestration to it, as I'll show you in our proposed design. Shown in this image of the east side of the house are the typical window and door fenestrations. Unadorned, 5 foot wide by 8 foot high window openings are sparsely set in the brick walls. Window walls at the flat roofed portions extend from brick pod to brick pod with large scale sheets of glass with varied mullion spacings. This is an image of the existing west side of the house. This side of the house features the front entry, which is not visible from the street. On the right side, at the 2-story pod, you can see the horizontal brick soldier course that wraps the bedroom pod at the intermediate floor line. On the left, at the kitchen family room pod, you can see the same typical brick soldier coursing at the roof eaves. Here, at the front door area, the intermediate wall surface is treated a bit differently than the other flat-roofed portions of the home. This 1-story wall is composed not only of glass and stucco, but also brick. In this image of the southern street elevation, you can see the stair tower that accesses the 2-story bedroom pod on the left. Being located within the flat roof zone of the home, the tower is rendered in a stucco finish. Now I'll concentrate on our proposed design. As I mentioned previously, each building pod is distinct with an allocated function. The opposite is true of the flat roof portion of the home. There, the living areas are much less physically defined, with spaces flowing between the pods. Essentially, the entire flat-roofed portion of the house is used as circulation space to reach each building pod. To address this problem, we intend to reconfigure the interior spaces to eliminate circulation through ways and make them more useful. At the living room and mudroom, interior renovation does not resolve the lack of space, so we intend to expand those rooms to make them appropriate sizes for today's living requirements. We intend to enlarge the living room, as shown in yellow, to accommodate a comfortable seating arrangement centered on a new fireplace. This will enlarge the living room space to a decent room dimension of 20 feet by 30 feet. At the kitchen pod, as shown in green, we propose to expand the porch dimensions by 3 feet in 2 directions. The shape and proportions of the new mudroom are similar to the original covered porch, but the enlarged space can accommodate the storage needs of the family. At the master bedroom pod, shown at the above left, additional fenestration is proposed facing the rear yard and a fireplace added at the southern wall. To provide additional indoor daylight, skylights are proposed in the roof similar to the original skylights of the kitchen. Here is the proposed second floor plan. As illustrated earlier, the existing home has one remote bedroom suite located on the right. The Riedels have 3 sons, and thus would like to add 2 bedrooms to the second floor above the family kitchen room pod. A proposed second floor loft connects the existing 2-story bedroom pod shown on the right and the proposed second floor bedroom pod shown on the left. This addition consolidates the children's bedrooms in one zone of the house. This image shows the proposed west facade at the entry. Over the kitchen family room pod on the left, the existing masonry walls are extended upward to form the second floor walls, starting from the existing first floor masonry soldier belt course. The 2-story pod on the left now matches the adjacent existing 2-story bedroom pod shown on the right. The flat roof connection between pods is comprised of a brick and glass wall with brick fascia above, which is consistent with the existing entry below. The proposed window opening locations in the kitchen and proposed second floor bedroom pod expansion are consistent with Ike Colburn's architectural language of stacked fenestration in the masonry wall surfaces of the pods. The new openings are sized to the 5-foot by 8-foot module to match the existing home. For safety reasons, we propose to replace the existing second floor sliding doors on the right bedroom pod with windows. The new second floor bedroom openings on the left also have windows instead of sliding doors. Exterior treatment of the expanded mudroom addition is consistent with the original Ike Colburn porch design and includes recessed lattice work that was indicated on the original construction drawings of the home. On the proposed north facade, we intend to add sliding doors to the family room and master bedroom pods, as well as skylights to the master closeting and bedroom. To maintain the simplicity of form that Ike Colburn subscribed to, the mudroom encases the chimney breast, and the mudroom is enlarged proportionately to the larger 2-story pod. On the proposed eastern facade, the living room extension consistently applies Ike Colburn's flat-roofed architectural language of glass walls with a stucco fascia above. At the non-visible facade of the flat-roof second-story addition beyond, we propose to limit the view of the roofscape from within the home by providing ribbon windows in the stucco wall above eye-level height. This stucco wall finish is contiguous with the adjacent stair tower wall finish. You can't see it in the picture, but there's the stair towers to the left there. The existing south facade facing the street remains unchanged. The family room expansion is tucked back from the front facade and will be shrouded by existing landscaping on the site. Let me go to the next one. Thanks. Finally, as you can see in this site plan diagram, the additions and renovations to the Riedel residence have minimal impact on the existing property and surrounding neighborhood. However, the changes will dramatically improve the livability of the home. The changes are distant from the neighboring homes and are buffered by existing mature trees and vegetation. In the upper left-hand corner of the site diagram, you can see an existing non-historic greenhouse that the Riedels want to demolish. The other outbuildings will be preserved. Landscape and site grading are unaffected by this project and will remain as is, with the exception of the areas immediately adjacent to the enlarged mudroom and living room extension. Ground repairs will be made at the greenhouse demolition area. In conclusion, all additions and renovations will utilize the architectural language of the original home, and building modifications are sympathetic to the intent of the original I.W. Colburn design. We hope that you will look favorably on this petition. The Riedels intend to make their improved home a comfortable and livable property that continues to contribute value to their neighborhood for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a staff report?
We do. Thank you, Chairman Peretz. This is an interesting petition for the Historic Preservation Commission, given the style of architecture of the existing house. The home is clearly a more modern style of architecture. It was designed by Colburn in the 1980s. And I would even go as far to say that the Commission has seen homes that were built in this time period in more recent decades come before them for demolition. So we're fortunate that the homeowner that purchased this home from the original owner was willing to expand the home in a manner that preserved the modern architectural character and really followed the original design intent as was discussed by the petitioner this evening. This request has really 4 components. There's the second floor addition above an existing pod, as we're calling them this evening, a 1-story extension of the center flat roofed area, the replacement of a rear porch with enclosed living space, new window openings on the rear facade, and the demolition of a non-historic greenhouse in the rear of the property. So the action that the Commission is requested to take this evening is for the partial demolition of certain areas of the existing structure and the greenhouse to allow for the new construction to occur. The staff report does note positive findings in support of the partial demolition as well as the proposed addition and alterations. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, but the petitioner did give a pretty thorough explanation of the design logic and architectural elements of the proposed construction.
Okay, thank you. So do we have questions on this petition?
Well, I have a question, and maybe it was answered, and I shouldn't be asking it, but the petitioner is not the owner, I see. I guess I was confused. The petition that we have here is the owner is crossed out, and it says petitioner. Is that?
The owner is the
Am I missing something
petitioner.
there?
Yeah, I think they closed up the property May 1st, right? Yeah.
Oh, I see.
The Riedels own the property, yes.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
I have a question for Diana. The east elevation, the windows that are in the stucco section of the new addition, the horizontal short windows, I just don't find that they flow with the rest of the house. Is there a reason for their shortness, and why was that type of window chosen?
Maybe Gavin, if you could go to the north elevation. Anywhere where you have that flat stuccoed area, there's you get those windows that are. I don't know how to use this one, but the flat portion in between. Yeah, right there.
So she's talking about, Diana, the raised window in the second floor element between the bedrooms?
The short.
Oh, you mean the one on the second floor?
Yeah.
The second floor,
Okay,
sorry.
yeah.
There you go.
We can explain that.
Is there a reason for their height and?
Yes, yes. Originally, we had proposed that it be glass and it matched the western side of the house,
Okay.
similar to the front elevation. However, if we made that glass, you'd be staring at a very large sort of, it's a flat roof, with gravel on top, sort of like you see in, a warehouse or something. So,
Okay.
so the issue was that the Riedels really didn't want, since they had all glass on the west side, they really wanted to have wall space and places to put artwork, potentially books and things, on that wall. And so those ribbon windows up at the top are above eye level, so you couldn't see out. But we felt as though because it was set so far back from, it's set back, I'm not sure the exact dimension, but
Yeah.
it's quite a distance. I want to say maybe 42 feet back. It's not,
Not noticeable?
yeah.
Okay. From this angle, they just look so odd.
Yeah, we struggle with it. We tried all glass the first time. We tried
No, I can
very
see it
different.
from ground perspective, they'll look different.
So the goal there was to get those sort of, you know, how all the transom windows are going across the top of the windows down
Right.
below. We were trying to at
Echo
least
those.
come up with the language of the transom windows.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. They just bothered me when I first saw them.
So this
Thank
is a difficult set of elevations to understand without seeing the building, actually.
Yeah,
That's why,
it's
it's
hard
definitely in 3 dimensions. When you walk around this house on the site, you get a better flavor for it. It's just hard to read the third dimension into these elevations. I think that you've done a nice job maintaining the character of the original architecture, but while still changing the interior quite a bit, actually. So it's interesting. Other questions?
Yeah, another question, again, it may have been answered. Is the stucco wall, is that was proposed, the wall we're just talking about that is set back some 40 or 42 feet, is proposed to be stucco? And did you address the color? What color do you see that being?
It would
Matching the
match
brick
right
tone,
around the
or-
corner. Gavin, maybe you could show the south elevation. That tower that's right in the middle.
Yes.
It's just adjacent to that. So we were
Okay.
going to pick the same stucco color that would be on all the fascias, and it would be on the tower as well.
Got it.
So on the back side of that 2-story pod on the left would be sort of where that wall would come in adjacent to it.
Right. And then the last question with regard to that wall is, have you looked at, and presume you have sight lines from the eye level of positions that people could be in, owners included, where that would be viewable? How
Yes.
much of the upper portion of that wall?
You're pretty much staring at the windows and above.
Window
You're not
and
looking,
above?
Yeah, you don't really
Okay.
see much wall, so that's
From
why I
any,
said it
any
was sort of not
position then,
visible.
which is a pedestrian, a normal pedestrian access.
Yeah, you can't get very far
Right.
east of this house because you run into the next property and it's
Yeah.
wooded, or screened at least. Is there-
It's quite screened on the other side, yeah.
Would it, well, I guess I'm really thinking about the view from the west, looking, oh, it's going to be, okay, I'm
From the
following, it's from the
east,
east.
yes,
East
it's
looking
Oh, yeah,
west.
That
Yeah.
that helps a lot. There's not a normal reason to be out there far from it, so, okay, thank you.
Very little change to the front of this house, I think, from
Yeah,
the
yeah,
street.
Yeah, that's working very nicely.
Questions? I think this is opportunity for public testimony then, if we have any. And I see one. Please come on up, Art.
So this is a good time to talk about good things about Mr. Coburn. I mean, this house, I think, was fairly late, and I'm not sure if he was still in town when this house was designed, living here, but he certainly was a regular visitor, if not living here. But this reminds me a little bit in concept of the essentially elemental plan for the house that's on Lake Road that I know that the Harshbergers owned for a while. I don't know who owns it now, across from the Bode part of Lake Road. But with the 4 pods, I think you could really call them pavilions around these links. And I guess that's kind of an elegant sort of plan. If the living spaces seem cramped today, perhaps somebody could remember how cramped the interest rates were in 1982. I think they were 20%. Which might have made all of us have cramped space arrangements at that time. What I don't have a clear, and I think also that the Mellicar firm has done a great job of living within that frame of reference and trying to make those different pavilions work. I think that's been successful. And I don't exactly have a sense of what the massing is going to be like from the kind of drawings that we've had. But maybe you have more illustrations than I had in my packet to show you this. But keeping the sense of the 4 distinct areas is certainly valuable. Whether it's change of materials, I think it's more self-effacing with just those clerestory windows at the top, which are very much a modern. Lots of architects use those clerestory windows up above in modern mid-century architecture. So I think that's a good element to introduce there. So it's hard for me to imagine exactly how that's going to work, but it seems like they really have cued into what he was trying to do with this, what is essentially an elemental plan. The one curiosity I have is about those outbuildings that are on the property. This was originally yes, right. This was originally the Crabtree Farm until about 1905 when Mrs. Scott Durant took her dairy farm, which had become somewhat olfactorily challenging to the neighbors, further up to the end, up into Lake Bluff. After that, in the 20s, this was the Thorpe Academy. It was a boys' school that used the original 1896 Zimmerman house that was kind of a shingle-style house that was there that came down in 35 when the house on the corner of Crabtree and Sheridan was built. So I don't know if these buildings date back to that earlier period. I don't know if they are more modern. I don't know the character of them. If they, since we didn't see any pictures of them in the illustration, how do they relate in terms of style to the what's there now, or to the 1982 building, and to conceivably the way the building is going to look when it's expanded? Is there any kind of relationship, or is this purely a self-referential project, and these are simply being preserved because they're there? Do they have I don't know if they have a function. Maybe one of them has a garage, but I'm not clear about how the current house relates to those buildings, nor how the expanded house will relate to those buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other public testimony? And I see none, so I'll ask Diana if she wants to address that last question. Thank you.
Sure. The house that was built in 1982 was really its own sculptural element that didn't really relate to the other buildings much at all, other than that the building on the left, the coach house, was used and is still a garage, and the Riedels plan on using it as a garage. And then the building on the right, it looked as though Mr. Adams, he had a piano in there, and it looked like he kind of used it just as additional entertainment space almost, almost like a summer house that you just, the Riedels were planning on using that as a playhouse. So.
Sure. Virginia?
The house on the far right was a playhouse that the Rowleys owned, who lived across the street on Crabtree Lane.
I'm only cutting you some slack because we've already introduced you.
What?
You have to introduce yourself.
Oh, Virginia McTeer, excuse me, 975 Kirk Hill Lane. I apologize.
Thank you.
Anyway, the house on the far right was a playhouse owned by the Rowleys, and then when the Adams built the house with Ike Coburn, they used that. He played the piano. Mr. Adams, Howard played the piano, and so he had a piano over there, and he would go over there, and that was sort of his playhouse. And then he had the most beautiful gardens, just gorgeous. And wasn't that building in the back for organic compost? Isn't that what he used it for? Because, well, I remember the playhouse because when I was a little girl, the Rowleys had a daughter my age, and that was a wonderful playhouse, so that's how he used it.
Thank you. All right, so it's an interesting background on some of this. I had some of the same kind of thoughts when I drove around the project. As Art brought up, there's two things I think that are kind of noteworthy. One is that there is really no relationship between these two outbuildings on either side to this structure. As a matter of fact, it's pretty close, right on top of this, the one to the west. But it's kind of existing. It's there. It's almost a challenge to the architecture that it's so proximate. But I'm not sure that there's any thing we can do about that. The other is just the concept that there's this break in the massing, these four masses that are surrounded by this low roof. And I think that that's probably one aspect of this where there's a little more compromise involved here between the original intent of the architecture and a clear separation of those four pieces. But I think it's probably a necessary one. I'm not sure how you would incorporate further living space into this without doing it. I think it's done fairly sensitively, and actually I think the west elevation is probably the most challenging elevation in terms of this element. The rest of them I'm quite confident are resolved well. The west elevation, you have a large mass against a large mass against a large mass. It's a little different than the previous solution where it was a large mass, a smaller mass, and then, you know, a relatively larger mass. There's three different kind of rhythms there before. The windows, I think, are helpful in the sitting area of the second floor and kind of breaking that up, and I think that that's some sensitivity to that. So I appreciate that sensitivity, and I just think that this is kind of, you know, one of those places that you end up with a compromise. It doesn't really bother me in terms of the way the house is read. I think the roof forms really help to break that up. I do think that when you're standing at the front door of this house, when it's done, it'll feel a little bit different than it does today, and I think that's just a necessary difference. So, I don't know if anybody else has any deliberating comments.
I have
Sure,
a question
that's
about,
fine.
is the architect, Art Coburn, still alive?
No.
Okay. Because as we've heard about some of his work in this and other projects, including the sliding glass patio doors at the second floor, the concept of statute of limitations comes to my mind. And I don't want a lawsuit from Mr. Coburn by having said that. You know, it also comes to my mind that here, as well as at the 902 project, he was not concerned with what was nearby when he designed and built his structure. So as we heard earlier, history is a narrative. You could be consistent with his approach and not have concern about what you're doing to his house.
Thank you for the color. How about you?
No.
Oh, good?
That's great.
All right, I'll ask for a motion then.
I would move to approve certificate of appropriateness for partial demolition and construction of additions to the main residence and demolition of the greenhouse subject to the conditions of approval in the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioner Ransom. So moved and seconded by
Seconded.
Commissioner Swenson. All in favor?
Aye.
And I see no opposed. So thank you very much. Congratulations. And Bill, go get Guy, I think. All right, our next request is for a certificate of appropriateness to allow the construction of a detached garage at 815 Barbary. Actually, I think it's kind of attached with a breezeway. And if you give us a minute, we'll get our missing commissioner back here. So, really? Sorry about that. I'm either mumbling or I'm. Thank you. All right.
Good evening, Chairman Peretz, Commissioners. Thank you for listening to our petition tonight. My name is John Krasnodebski, and I'm the architect for this project. I'm joined here tonight by John Doheny. He is the contract purchaser for this property. He's going to take ownership of it in July 10th. So we're here tonight to request for approval of a garage addition, and the addition is connected to the home by a breezeway, an open breezeway. So I'll start off with pictures of the home. It's at 815 Barberry, and it's at the corner of Barberry and Woodbine. And this is a view of the front elevation of the home as seen from across the street on the sidewalk. You can see it's a white brick colonial slate roof, true by light windows with operable shutters. There has been an addition put on in 1998 that did require a zoning variance, and it was a garage, mudroom, family room addition, and a sunroom as well on the back. So we studied a lot of different options for locating this garage, and I'll explain some of those options that we looked at. But first, let's look at the neighborhood. I'll get there. Start over. Here's another view of the home. This is looking towards the home again, but further to the west, and we're kind of looking at the location of where the garage is intended to go. It would be to the west of the home, and it would be beyond these trees right here. So there is a lot of screening, a lot of vegetation that does offer a lot of screening and doesn't allow for much. You can't really see the garage from this view. So I think it's a great location for it. And what's nice about that location is that the driveway, there's no additional driveway requested from the street. It would be designed as a spur off of this semicircular garage approach. So it'd be off to the right, and we'd be able to drive and approach that garage from the existing driveway. So no additional curb cuts would be requested for this proposal. Here's another view looking at the home. You can see it's heavily screened. I can barely see it. And again, the garage is off to the right. This is a view at the foot of the driveway of the neighbor to the west. Again, looking towards the home. The home is back here. You can kind of see a boxwood hedge here. That's the approximate location of the garage. So again, nice screening, great location for it. This is a photograph that we took several weeks ago where there wasn't as much vegetation, and I want to just point out a detail of where the addition is going to be located. So this window becomes the garage breezeway doorway. So there'd be a 12-foot breezeway connecting the home to the garage. This is a view of the existing garage along Woodbine. This is the addition that was built in 1998. And it matches very well. It's slate roof, white brick, coach house type doors, and the massing I think is very appropriate to the home. And this is one of the options that we looked at earlier as a potential area for an addition for the garage. But there have been some zoning obstacles for that location. So I'll show you some streetscape scenes here again, looking at the house, looking down the street to the west, and looking to the east. So here's the proposed site plan. The addition is shaded. You can see the driveway, which is a gravel driveway, and you can see the approach that comes to the driveway there. So there are no setback issues. It's fully conforming to the setbacks. It's conforming to the bulk ordinance. And we have set it further back from the setback of this wall here. It's set back 2 feet. The breezeway is 12 feet wide. The garage itself is 22 feet wide by 20 feet 6 deep. One of the options that we looked at is the garage extension to the existing garage. And we looked carefully at that, studied it from an elevational standpoint and a plan standpoint, but unfortunately, the whole addition would be a non-conforming into the setback area. And so that was a zoning obstacle that was really difficult to overcome and really can't be overcome because to get a zoning variance, you need a hardship. And since this addition was built in 1998, that is what's created. You can't claim a hardship because of that addition that was done in 1998. So from a zoning standpoint, just completely not doable. We worked with staff on that, and studied quite a bit, and it was just too difficult to overcome. So we looked at other options, and I believe the current option is the best option. So here's the front elevation, and we've drawn the garage addition off to the west. You can see the breezeway, it's open, so you can see through it. The garage is 18 feet tall. The coach house doors look like windows with shutters. This gable end is very similar to the gable end that's on the house. We have very similar detailing with brackets, soffit and fascia. And the brick is going to match, the slate roof is going to match. Now, we looked at turning that gable end in the other direction. You can see there's a real directional aspect to the existing roof here. So we studied that as an option, turning this gable, going to an east-west direction. And I'll show you a picture of that. But we felt this was a more graceful solution as an addition because the roof does taper, the nature of the gable tapers down to a lower elevation at the ends. So our concerns about this project were we did not want to show a taller gable to the neighbor to the west, nor do we want to crowd the existing home with a taller gable here. So I felt that this tapering down transitions very well to the neighbor to the west and also transitions down to the original home. We want to have as little impact to the original home as possible. And so that's why we decided not to attach the home directly to the garage. So we have that separation, that see-through aspect that really allows some breathing room to the original home. And I felt that was a really successful way to add on. Some other aspects of this proposal are some window changes. Right now, there's a casement, double casement window in the kitchen in this location. That was done in the 90s. So what we're proposing to do is put a double hung window that's more sensitive to the existing architecture with the real shutters, and also have a flanking window to create a symmetrical design on this wall. So right now there's one window, it's a casement, replacing it with a double hung. There used to be another window that was bricked in the 90s in the middle, and that has been bricked in. So we're going to keep that as a brick surface, but again, introduce a new opening. It creates a very symmetrical design on the outside, as well as provides an asymmetrical layout on the inside. This projected element here is part of the 1998 addition. Right now, it's a solid brick wall, and we would like to put in a double hung window with shutters in that wall. This is the rear elevation, and you can see the back of the garage and the breezeway. The repetition of window to wall is very similar to the existing home. I think that the breezeway is a nice element to have that see-through effect through the home. I think it's a nice balance between this gable and that gable. This elevation is here for some proposed changes to the fenestration of this wall. These three windows are existing. There is a door here. We'd like to make that a window. This is, again, is the 1998 edition, by the way. So that becomes a window, and there used to be there is a door there now. What we'd like to do is put a door here. This has become the new mudroom. Here's a view of the garage from the west. Again, the repetition and balance of wall to window is very similar to the proportion and repetition that we have in the existing home. I'll show you this picture because we did study the garage going the other direction. And so we were not comfortable with this space in between the two walls, and we didn't like the height of the gable facing to the west. If we did the garage doors on the west side, that did dramatically increase the amount of pavement, and that was another consideration that we were very careful of and wanted to minimize the impact to the site. There is quite a nice side yard there, and we'd really like to keep it as much grass versus paving. The new paving that we do propose is going to be gravel to match the existing driveway approach. There is a tree that is very close to where the addition is going to be, within 7 feet, and it's a Norway maple, which is somewhat of an invasive species. We did have the forester look at it. He deemed it not to be a specimen tree, and one that we could replace inch for inch and actually add to that with some additional screening. We feel that that is going to be a great way to make this really nestle in to the existing home. And so that is a landscape plan that we intend on proposing with the permit application that would show additional screening to the west between the neighbor and the garage, and some additional screening in front of the garage to the streetscape. So those are both elements we're going to very carefully consider and add to the project, and work closely with staff to create something that's really going to fit in well with the neighborhood. So we feel that this is the best solution of all the options we looked at. It minimizes the pavement. It's as low as it possibly can be. It's much lower than the existing home. It is set back from the street by 85 feet. It's set back from the existing home. We're not asking for any variances from any of the bulk, setbacks, lot coverage. It's fully conforming in all aspects of the codes. So I'll leave it with the front elevation, and I hope you will approve our project. Thank you.
Thank you. Staff report?
Thank you, Chairman Peretz. Just a few brief comments. Staff did work with the petitioners to review various options for this site. The preferred option of the petitioner is to extend the existing garage, and from a zoning perspective, that is not something that was found to meet the criteria, and it's not something that could be supported. So with that, they did look at alternatives, really with the goal of looking at preservation of the streetscape, respecting the integrity of the existing historic residence, preserving the vast open space both in the rear yard and to the west of the house. There really is, if you walk the property, that lawn is pretty expansive. And to minimize the amount of additional driveway. In looking at the various options presented, this plan really did seem to meet those objectives. With the significant landscape bed along Barbary, the garage really is screened quite well. As Mr. Krasnodebski said, the city arborist was out, did walk the site, determined that the one tree that would be lost actually is compromised to some extent already with some dieback, and that as the project gets underway, that really looking at that planting bed and seeing where enhancement of that bed would be necessary, or any additional screening along the west property line would be necessary, would be an appropriate use of the replacement inches. Staff does recommend approval of the petition, and you have really quite standard conditions of approval in the staff report. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Comments?
Go ahead.
No, you mentioned you were going to show us the option in which the gable roof was extended in a linear fashion consistent with the house. I'm not suggesting that would be the preferred option, just wondered if we were going to see it.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that very last one?
The very last one showed
okay,
it, yeah.
I thought
right.
it might have been, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, let's take another look at it, just so you can take another look at it. Yeah, there it is.
Got it. Okay.
So in this option, the garage doors are on the west side, and so the increased pavement became, we felt, not a great option. And then I didn't like the height proximity to the existing home. It's a little bit of an uncomfortable. Maybe if the breezeway was longer and was further away, but again, that's more impact to the site, so that wasn't a viable solution either. So I thought showing the gable and the doors to the street with sufficient screening seemed to be a good punctuation, termination. Looks more like a pavilion than a garage, in my opinion, especially with the coach house doors looking like French doors with shutters. I think that would be really attractive once you do get into the site. So I thought it had the least impact to do it that way.
Great. Thank you.
My question was there consideration, and I think the gable facing front is preferable to the preferable solution, but was consideration given going without the cupola that seems to add a lot of height to this?
Well, again, we did consider that, yes, indeed. And it was an effort to blend in with the garage that's in the 1998 edition. There's a cupola there, and so we felt a consistent vocabulary would be a nice way to treat this project. So it's something that, we felt is consistent, but we did study it both ways, and
It just strikes me that it would be just pure opinion that having those odd bookends of cupolas on both sides and having a simpler line would be the preferred way to go, but that's my opinion.
Did you have a photograph of the other garage, the existing garage? Maybe
Yeah,
you throw that back
I
up
do.
and we could take a look at that cupola again. So it's kind of one of those things that's quite prominent when you look for it, but if you don't look for it, it's not quite sure that it's all that prominent.
But that's off on the side on a different
Yeah,
street
yeah, no,
rather
you're
than,
right.
than,
You're-
than
yeah,
the
you're right.
front
Yeah, you're right.
element of the house.
Yeah.
So.
So now, John, if you don't mind going back to that original, or that front elevations for us,
sure.
or maybe even the picture of the front of the house. Let's go to the picture.
Picture?
of the-
Okay.
Yeah, please. Well, yeah, it tells a lot of the story there. Other questions?
John, you make a good point about the additional asphalt. If you side load the garage, and the rub to just sliding that garage over to the house is that you're going to take out windows?
Right, and that's correct. Because we didn't want to place it right adjacent to the home. We felt respect the home a little bit more, have as little contact to the original home as possible. So that was the feeling, is just really respect the main mass of the house and have the garage look as a pavilion that's separate from the house.
That's all.
All right, I don't see a lot of other questions, so I'll ask if there's any public testimony on this one. Yeah, I see a couple, so why don't we take the gentleman standing first? Thank you.
My name is Jerry Henry. I live at 771 Barberry Lane, the western neighbor of the petitioner's home. Our home and this home were built in the late 20s when the main estate was broken up at that time. But it was broken up to build these two houses for the son and daughter of the people that lived in the main estate. So at the time, of course, these houses on Barberry Lane were set back, each have two-car garages hidden in the back. It was fairly rare to have anything more than a two-car garage. Over the years, and we've lived in our house now for almost 34 years, lived in Lake Forest for 45, and having served on the zoning board and the city council, it's over the years, struck me the purported need for more and more garages, more and more space for 2, 3, 4, 5 cars and boats, with the proliferation of garages facing the streetscape, with gaping garage doors facing the streetscape. We seem to treat the increased bulk added by a garage almost on the same breath with living space improvements. But they are not, of course. To increase the bulk on a beautiful street like Barberry, to house a car or 2 cars or 3 cars, doesn't run as it the same way that if it were needed for living space. And that's one of the reasons we do have a requirement, a limitation on the amount of square feet that can be devoted to garages. This plan exceeds that. This plan would create 973 square feet of garage space from a permitted 800. We seem to be, I don't see any reason for that. I don't see why we are permitting an additional 173 feet over what would be normally required for this size lot. This will make a distinct impression on the streetscape. In fact, as Art Miller reminds me, Barberry Lane is the main street. Woodbine was historically the service street for the estates that were in the area at the time. In addition, we don't seem to be giving much credence to the fact that the driveway itself will be increased by over 50%. It is my hope that the new owner will live in the house for a little bit, come around to my way of thinking that this will impact the streetscape, and be a detriment to the neighborhood. In the alternative, the permitted one-car garage that would not go over the 800 square foot limit could very well be built on Woodbine. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, I think there is some important history at play here, and I think that there are lots of different hands on this elephant, but I don't think it hurts at all to remember that the Barberry Lane type of street, that street I think is part of, whether it was called Barberry or not, it was part of the 1857 Elmer and Hotchkiss street plan, one of the first design landscape, certainly in the Chicago area on that scale. I'm pretty sure that the Woodbine is a later addition to the plans of the streets, and it originally did have and still does have garages on it to some extent. Certainly down at the corner of Woodbine Place and Woodbine Lane, there's an old garage from 1904. Now, what I'm not clear on, because I haven't been down the street lately, is if Mrs. Wendell's house is still there, the old Laughlin 1907 garage. Do we know if that's there a little bit to the south? Is that still there? I'm not sure how close that is to the street, but I understand that we have zoning that is saying that that's a setback, but I think that that's a probably misapplication of the zoning for that particular street. That would be my contention, that if you're going to have garages, and I don't want to get into entirely that argument, but the garages belong over there. I don't care. I know there have been some nice houses that have been built on that street to make it not be a service street, but in essence, there is still a gardener's cottage on that street for the old Buckingham estate that goes back to 1880. There's that garage from 1904 that's Arthur Hoyne that's at the south end of the street. And I think we need to think really hard about enforcing that whole setback in that setting, in putting into the setup for the house on the Barberry facade there, and changing that. That's a really change to the streetscape. Now, the addition to the, if it had to be there, one thing I would ask about would be the pitch of the roof to the 1930 house. I haven't heard mentioned the architect of that house. I don't know if we know that or not. But certainly this is somebody like Ralph Millman, Ambrose Kramer, somebody who, Alfred Granger, who knew the rules, and the angle of that pediment, if we were going to have another feature with a pediment on it, we'd want to be sure that we were staying within that same angle of the pediment if we possibly could. If you had to have it that way, you would certainly not want to have any garage doors facing Barberry. You'd figure out a way to do a courtyard there or something. Another alternative to the Woodbine thing that might be a possibility would be to the south of the current garage, build the garage within the space that's not part of the setback, in the lawn that we're talking about keeping so sacred, but I don't think it's illegal to have a driveway through a setback, or alter the, make it so that you can curve around to get to it. But I think if we just had Charles Stick in the room, we have moving into Lake Forest, we have Craig Bergman, we have precedent of other architects, and Mr. Gazdowski knows all about this, of how you could probably take that garage, put it within that place, have a trellis that would unite it to the current garage, and have a nice garden space north of a garage that was set into that space that was not within the setback. And they would have a very nice garden that would look just like a David Adler garden up at Crabtree or something like that, space that had three sides around it to protect it from the wind. You have a very nice rose garden in there, or a place to have your barbecue. I think having something that's only one story going down onto that to the west, something that's if not symmetrical, is a balanced house with 2 stories pretty much on both sides. You're going to be elongating out to the west, changing the character of that. And also, I wouldn't want to have a garage way on the other side of the house from the other 2 parts of the garage and where everything is. So even though our zoning law seems to be telling us what to do, I think we're doing something that's very counterintuitive with this property. And what looks like a contributing structure by an architect who knew the rules, that was trained probably at the École de Beaux-Arts, who put it on Barbary, and I think we don't want to confuse him. Mr. Gazdowski has responded to what the city's told him to do. His clients have listened. And I'm not trying to get them to hire another specialist. I'm slow and bide a while, attorneys at law, to jam up against the zoning on this. But this is really counterintuitive. I don't think this has to do with that estate street. To have a small structure over there, it's not a garden element. Really think about how you could make that work, either just inside the setback on the east side, or right next to the garage, or maybe just a little bit ajar from it would be probably the least difficult thing. Look at Mrs. Wendell's house, if it's still there, the Laughlin garage. That's the character of that street. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure, please.
Jan Gibson, 59 East Franklin Place. I echo what Art said. I know they're trying to get around the zoning problem, but this street is so charming, and to have a new garage right there face to the street is so sad. And I know that John was trying to work around the best he could on that. As I was listening to the comment, if any way they could go through the existing garage to put something in the back, or because there's a lot of property there, it would be better than on the streetscape. So, just a comment.
Please. Oh, one more. Oh, you leave. Sorry.
Pauline Moore, 2000 Knollwood Road. John showed a drawing that was originally the preferred, with the garage on the garage that's already there. I guess it's on the east side. And he said they preferred that, but it didn't meet the criteria for setbacks and so forth. And that went over my head. But as Art was speaking up here and saying it was counterintuitive, it reminded me that a number of years ago, when they started to have redevelopment on these small streets running off of McKinley, and that would be, I think, Noble, and help me with some of the names of those streets. Oh, no. Coming off of McKinley, there are small homes on there. Yes, all of those streets. All right. A petition came in. I think that probably came before the Building Review Board, and they were going to demolish a small one. They're all, very nice small homes that have been undergoing rehabilitation and so forth. But anyway, there was one that was a demolition. Now it comes before the board, and the setbacks have changed since the rest of the street had been constructed. And which would have been, you'd have house, 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 and then the new one setback. And once they realized that that would really impact and negatively impact that streetscape, they began then changing, not by law or not by zoning, but probably by variance, allowing any new construction on those streets to follow the original setbacks, to not disturb the streetscape. And it seemed to me that when Art talked about being counterintuitive and so forth, that probably that would be a better solution, to get their variance, go to the zoning board and have the garage where they want to have it and not impact the neighbors and Barberry.
Thank you. Any other public testimony? And I see none, so it's time for deliberation. And I guess, Kathy, I think I'll have to ask you to clarify the zoning situation here, and particularly the hardship issue, given the location of the house, so that we understand that better.
The situation that Ms. Moore described, on some of those smaller streets, when a new house is being constructed, the zoning board has consistently allowed new homes to be constructed in line with the predominant location on the street. This is a case where garage bays are being added. And the zoning board really operates much different than the building review board. The criteria that the zoning board is required to use actually are based on state statutes. One criteria states that the hardship cannot be caused by anything the current property owner or a prior property owner has done to the property. So the justification that the garage needs to be is most appropriately added on Woodbine because that's where the existing garage was constructed, that hardship is invalid because actually a previous property owner constructed those garages. The hardship is also related to what the element is that's being constructed. To add a third and fourth car garage bay isn't necessarily seen as a hardship. So I think from the staff perspective, we would be steering the petitioners wrong to suggest that they spend their time and money to go to the zoning board. This type of addition isn't going to meet the zoning criteria. The fact that there are other alternatives will also play into the zoning board's consideration. So I think it would be very, very difficult for the zoning board to make a positive finding that this particular project meets the criteria for a variance from the zoning code, which carries the force of law.
So then just, sorry, one more question just to beat that up thoroughly. The garage that was added did get a variance, so you just have to kind of steer me through that. Why do you think that was likely?
Well, I think from time to time the scrutiny of the boards change. I think there was a time when perhaps we were operating under a different legal system, different legal advice, different legal opinions. I do think in the past granting of zoning variances was more lenient and wasn't scrutinized as closely based on the criteria from the state statutes. I think what also played into that was probably the fact that a portion of the existing house, which predated the current zoning requirements, was already extending into that encroachment, and that there was a reasonableness to seeing 2 garage bays constructed on the property. So I think the analysis was a bit different. I think that they were working from the original house, seeing that there was some encroachment. I think having a second variance granted on a property is very different.
And let me just ask another kind of similar but different question for you. In the event that they were to want to expand the existing 2-car garage to the west so that it was a double depth garage, it would still be in the setback, Is that something that would be equally difficult to do? So that there's not a further, what's the right word? Influence on the street.
I think that would be less difficult. Again, I think the zoning board is gonna look at that very carefully to see if the addition of garage bays is a hardship, to see if the city did something to this property to change the rules.
Right.
Originally, the city did do something to this property to change the rules, and one variance was granted. But I think that would be perhaps more easy to justify. But again, there is another option that exists, so I can't speak to what the zoning board would do.
So it's a sticky wicket for us, folks. We've got kind of an intuitive solution that doesn't comply with law. And we've got a fairly well-rendered, option that is probably not a benefit to the historic nature of this street or house. And I don't think it's not well done. I think that it's, given the constraints of what we were working with here, I think it's probably as well done as it could be. But I do think that it's the kind of thing that when you arrive at the driveway of this house, you recognize as something that's an appendage, just regardless of how well it's done, just because of the way the driveway comes off and the location of it. And I do think it's kind of counterintuitive to get garages on both ends of it. So, I don't know. Got any ideas?
Well, and also too, by bifurcating the garaging, we're compromising the logic of a floor plan of an historic home, and that makes it a little odd in terms of how it resales in the future. Because one of the things about these old homes is that the more desirable they are, the better clientele they pick up on when they go on the market, and they sustain themselves better because of that. And I think that's a positive thing, These existing garage doors that are on the garage now, they're more than 9 feet wide, aren't they?
They're 9 feet wide.
They are 9 feet?
Yeah.
The existing doors?
Correct.
They are, huh?
That's a great point. It really compromises the interior flow. I
Well-
assume that existing office is a fairly formal room being off of the living room, and that's the formal side of the home. And then to have an exterior entrance leading to a garage, I feel really compromises the integrity of the interior.
Well, actually, it works out perfectly for John, who's going to work at home a lot. That's going to be his office, and so when he travels to the office and he comes back, it's right next to his office, so it works really well. It's the most remote part of the house. It's the quietest room in the house, so for his work to get done, works really well. So from a flow standpoint, we're not concerned at all. It actually flows much better for John, the homeowner.
For John, right.
Yeah, yeah. And as you can see on this elevation,
But for the future of the house, it might not flow so well.
I don't know why it's fell asleep on me. I just want to show you how the garage does balance the other side of the home. It's a very nice balance. It went to sleep, huh? This one? I just want to show you how it balances the exterior, the 1998 addition on the left. As you can see, it's a one-story element set back. And this is also set back too. I mean, of course, it looks like a very flat elevation, but this is set back. It's in the same location as that is. So it really bookends the main mass very nicely, I think. And it matches the roof slope of the existing home. And so I think it's a great solution considering the options. I mean, we studied all the options, and this is the only viable option that we have. And it doesn't, like I said earlier, it doesn't ask for any variances. And I think screening, I mean, you saw the streetscape, it's very well screened. I think the breezeway is a really nice way to respect the original home and keep it as a separate element. I think there's a lot of elements of this addition that really are sensitive to the existing home. I mean, if you look at the standards from the Secretary of Interior standards, they like additions to be as separate and individual and as little change to the existing home as possible. And I think this is like the best way you could do that. it affects the home in the least way. We're changing a window to the door, removing maybe 4 square feet of brick to get that door. So I think has so minimal impact to the home that I think it really works well. The one-story element matches the one-story element on the east side. So I think they're great bookends.
I just don't think you're considering future owners, and really that is the more formal end of the house, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would want a garage entrance off of a room attached to a formal living room.
And future owners can decide to remove it if they don't like it.
Right.
That's what's so great about this. It doesn't affect the original home at all. It'd be so easy if somebody wanted to remove it. That's one of the major points of Secretary of Interior standards, do something that can be reversed. And if somebody felt that was not viable for them. But the Doheny's, they're a young family. They're going to be here for a long time.
Thanks, John.
I
just have one more thought.
You know what, we're running late here, so really 1 minute, please, because I want to make sure everybody gets their say on this, but we have another agenda item after this as well, and this is a sticky one. I'm not sure we'll get a result here.
I would just like to reemphasize my point that this is already over the 800 square foot limitation that this commission has imposed.
Yeah.
That would mean to me that there's room for 1-car garage, and that might change the whole dynamics of what could be done on Woodbine.
Thank you, appreciate that. And actually, Kathy, I would like to ask you that question regarding how the area is calculated and whether or not they could accredit against the house, or why or is this something that requires a further variance?
It doesn't require variance. The way the code is written, there's a specified allowance for the garage. A garage that exceeds that square footage must take that square footage out of what's allotted for the house. This property does not require any variances, or this project does not require any variances at all.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, Kathy, a question just for you. If a garage was to be located off of Woodbine Place, but outside of the 50-foot setback, so further west than the 50-foot setback, that could also be done without any variance. So that's an alternative solution, although obviously it has a big imposition on the rear yard and landscaping and all those kinds of things. I understand that. Any other deliberation comments? I mean, do folks have a consensus of how they feel about this?
Yeah, I'm struggling with it right now. It seems to be trying to find a solution to a difficult problem, and it might be the best solution that there is to be had, but I'm not convinced of that at this point. There seems to be room to put a garage in different places, although it might not be as elegant as this solution, through the existing garage, or setback adjacent to the existing garage inside the setback area, as a detached garage if it's really the need for additional garage space. So I'm really struggling with it.
Fred?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I also do not see a clear-cut, obvious solution here, or as a outcome that I can feel good about. You can feel good about certain features that are here. Don't feel good about many other features. I think the one comment you had made was the roof slope is the same. Just checking roof slopes here. It's the same as the slope of the main house, the gable of the main house, which from the street you don't perceive. You don't know what that slope is unless you go over to the side. It's not the same slope as the pediment that you do see. So I've, first of all, been bothered by that ever since we've been looking at these plans, the fact that there is such a similarity in detailing form and eaves between the proposed garage addition and the pediment of the house, and yet they are different slopes, they have different angles to them. I did check to see what the gable was on the main house, and it does match that, but they aren't seen together, so one would never know that they're the same. So the conflict is what is presented. There is the issue of presenting garage doors to Barbary, taking into account they could be nice garage doors and detailed very nicely. I still don't feel good about it. I think Mr. Miller made some very good points about the character of the street, Barbary, and what is there versus Woodbine. I'm sensitive to that. Been bothered since I first saw the plans, before I know anything about it, a garage at one end of the house and a garage at the other, and I just visualize somebody saying, oops, I left my car keys in the other garage. We have a big trip to make to go get, just on a functional level. I mean, it has nothing to do with historic preservation, I guess, but except to the extent that Commissioner Berg made, that it maybe affects the value of the house to future owners, and that does have an impact upon perhaps the sustaining the value of the house and maintaining it and so on, if it doesn't attract owners that would do that. So that bothers me. Everything points towards having any increased garage space in the zone of where the garage already is, from land planning use, from the character of the street point of view, from functional point of view, and then we have the issue, of course, of the zoning. And I am not an expert on what the law says and what prior owners did, which were allowed then, but you can't use that as precedent. That's not an area I can venture into. I'll leave that to other people. The notion of double deep garage at that point hit me early on, but I see that would be very detrimental to the view from the sunroom, and just about basically kill it. You'd be looking at the side of a garage. So what I'm coming around to is that every corner, every avenue we go down is problematic. And I thought when we were about to hear what the best solution may be, I thought the words we're going to finish is don't do anything. I'm not convinced this is the best. If you're going to do something, is this the best thing that could be done? I'm not convinced that it is.
Well, Fred, you hit the nail on the head and a bunch of other ones too. As I've been looking at this, I've been thinking that if we were to go with a garage on Barbary like this, I'd like to see maybe what that site plan might look like if you did rotate the ridge and actually put it up against the house. It would decrease the amount of asphalt from the scheme you showed us before, and it would definitely, I think, render the massing from the street more nearly balanced. And I'm not saying that if you did that would satisfy everybody. I'm just wondering if that might look more in keeping with the rest of the house as it presents itself to the street. Inevitably, I think that the only solution legally that we can let someone do is have a spur off of the front driveway and let them park on the side of the house like this. So I guess I'd like to see it maybe taken to another level where we don't see doors from Barbary. I think that would probably wrestle me in the direction of approving it. I guess introducing these doors onto the streetscape, it leaves me feeling like this really is an addition. And if there's a way you can do it and subordinate those doors, I'd feel a lot more comfortable. I think that's about how I'm coming out of this, because I can see that side yard setback issue on the other street is probably something we can't overcome. So how can we make this one work? And I think if you tried that, John, it might be that your asphalt wouldn't be that much more than what you have now, because you have to have room to pull the car out even in the front over more than a driveway sweep. I mean, it might be worth a pass. That's my thought right now. And I had that before we met tonight too, so if you're listening to everything, it's sort of like making me more resolved.
He drew it.
You're not supposed to do that.
He drew it for himself. It's not very good drawing.
No.
There's my drawing.
Oh, you did it too. Nice. Do you have a comment or
No,
deliberation?
I agree
So I guess I think what I'm hearing is I don't think that we would carry an approval motion on this. I think that we have two things we could talk about. One would be whether we would approve and want to approve any change to this drawing, even if it was submitted. My temptation is to continue this and suggest that you look at this two ways. The first would be to have another conversation, even though staff is not going to like my remark here, about what a hardship really is and whether or not the refusal of the Historic Preservation Commission to give you an approval would even be a hardship. You know what I mean? Because I think that she's shaking your head no over there, so just for the record. I do like Guy's idea of minimizing the impact of Barbary by turning the garage doors. I actually thought that that might be a negative to the neighbor to the west, but I think that given the remarks, it probably would be preferential to the doors that face Barbary and probably better historically for the house. So unless I hear any other deliberations, discussions, or whatnot, I either can take a motion to vote on this or to continue this. And
I'm for rotating it and keeping it separate so that it has the possibility of being demolished in the future.
Well, then I think you would like to continue it.
yeah, we need to see a plan on that if we're going to do that. So do I have a motion to continue the agenda?
I'd make a motion to continue the petition to the, well, generally, I don't want to make him come back in the next regularly scheduled meeting, but to continue the petition generally.
Thank you. Motion made by Commissioner Ransom. Do I have a second?
I second that, and it's possible that to kind of qualify that the motion is that you don't, I don't think what you want to walk out of here is that if I have to come back with it rotated.
That's right.
I think what it means is that we'd like to see maybe what that would look like, and it could very well be maybe this is the better of those. So that's, I think, what we mean by the spirit of the coming back.
Yeah, I agree, and I think just to further clarify that before we vote on that, you know, this is a tricky little one. We found that we had the same situation with the pool house earlier in the day, and you know, this is the kind of thing that we just like to consider a little deeper before we just rubber stamp one solution or another. So, you know, I'd encourage you to look at alternatives for us. Any other ideas would be great, but I don't think we're prepared to approve this tonight.
Could I add just another alternative that might be looked at?
Sure.
Would be something along the lines of a independent pavilion, if you want to consider that a pavilion, south of the and west, slightly west of the existing garage, but within the setback, so that there wouldn't be if that's an option. I heard that could be an option. In other words, far enough down that it would not be blocking the of significant impact on the sunroom view, and not having the zoning problem, and keeping all of the garage activity in one general area, and treating it as an independent element as you're doing here, but in that vicinity rather than on the front of the house. That is an alternative. I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm saying that would be an alternative.
All right, so I think you've got the alternatives. A motion's been made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I hear no opposed, so that petition's continued, and good luck with that. That's a challenging one.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for listening.
All right, we have one final agenda item, and that will be request for certificate of appropriateness to allow an addition and alteration at 30 North Awani Road. Apologize for the late hour. Oh my gosh, I believe there's two more. Sorry about that.
Caribou copies.
All right, the hour's late, but it's not 4:10.
In the morning?
No, it's 9:24.
We still have an hour and 47 minutes of time to.
But we'll use it.
How much time do we have left?
Till 11.
I know, we have the 1 hour break now, don't we?
Oh, yeah, we have. So we all have to go to.
Caribou Coffee's bringing product, I think.
Break and deliberation. Silent deliberation. Each in his own way.
This is. Two more. All right, thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Scott Stradiff, and I will be presenting this petition tonight on behalf of the owners, Ed and Marie Pasquesi. The primary intent of this petition is to request the approval of an approximately 713 square foot addition and for exterior improvements to the existing residence located at 30 North Awani Road. These improvements shall include the following. A new 1.5-story sunroom addition to the south side of the structure, removal of the existing 3-season room at the same location, and removal of the existing asphalt shingle roofing materials and installation of a new roof consistent with the period of this home. The proposed modifications comply with all zoning, bulk, and building scale requirements for the 24,150 square foot lot. This portion of Awani Road is characterized by a fairly wooded streetscape with deep lots and homes set well off the street. The west boundary of Anwensia Country Club runs along the east side of the street, and the west side of the street is characterized predominantly by gracious manor homes. The Pasquezzi's property, which you see here, is located on the west side of the street within the boundaries of the city's Green Bay Road Historic District. Just show you a few photos of the property. This is the north property line. This is kind of looking along the south property line, and this is the general area of where the proposed addition is. This is standing in the location of the proposed addition looking towards the rear of the property. And a few pictures of the rear terraces and patios. And then again, this is the area looking towards the street. The existing English Tudor-style home was designed and built for Mr. Charles Kimball in 1927 by noted architect Stanley Anderson. These are some of the images of the original drawings to the home. This is the front facade as it was originally designed. And this is the original first floor plan. As part of this project, a small portion of the existing building will be removed. The existing 11-foot by 14-foot 3-season room that is to be removed was originally an open-air side porch to the residence with no enclosure. This is revealed in these drawings, which date back to June 21st, 1927. At some point, a contractor was hired to install sliding glass doors, converting it to a 3-season room. This construction was not consistent with the integrity of the original structure and is really not suitable for year-round living. Also, the resulting interior finished space is not adequately scaled to the balance of the home. The Pasquezzi's are quite fond of the location of this room, however, with the southern exposure and the proximity to the gardens and rear terraces. And so it is for this reason that they are inspired to create a sunroom addition that can be utilized year-round for family gathering and entertaining. The existing 3-season room extends 11 feet from the existing structure. The new sunroom will extend approximately 17 feet 6 inches. The space between the south facade of the new sunroom and the neighboring structure is approximately 50 feet. And the new addition will be 35 feet 6 inches off the south property line, which is well within the required 20-foot setback line for this property. What you see here are the proposed front and rear elevations. The new addition and exterior improvements will be compatible with the existing home and will not adversely impact the character. The proposed design is consistent with the original design, repeating the architectural language and details originally incorporated into the home. The new addition will consist of high-quality traditional materials such as reclaimed Chicago brick, Chicago common brick, limestone, half timbering and stucco gables, copper flashing, half-round gutters, wood soffit, fascia, and rake profiles to match, and new wood windows replicated to match the original. The roof is currently an architectural grade asphalt shingle and will be replaced with a new roof consistent with the period of the home, I think. This is the proposed south elevation. You can kind of see ghosted in here the balance of the house. The main mass and roof lines of the south elevation have remained relatively unchanged. It's just projected further south. I know you're not particularly concerned about the interior, but I just wanted to give you this is the proposed first floor plan and kind of give you an idea of what our thought process was here, which kind of led to some of the masses and arrangement of the exterior. As you walk in the front foyer of the house right here, there's really a strong central access here with a lot of repeating arches that kind of repeat through this, the rooms of the house. And so the idea was to continue that and have an archway kind of leading into the garden room, and then eventually sort of resolve itself with the same arch repeating in the windows at the end of the house. This is an interior view of the sunroom looking back towards the foyer, where you can see these arches kind of continue all the way to the dining room. And then really the second floor is just an expansion of the master bedroom. They're really in need of closet space and some additional storage. This is currently their existing closet space that's sort of tucked under the roofline of the existing three-season room, and they're just looking to sort of expand on that. So our intent for this property is to preserve the character and quality of this distinctive residence and design to a level that is consistent with the original architectural design and craftsmanship of the home. The proposed project consists of an addition that satisfies the needs of the owners, Ed and Marie Pasquesi, as well as the relevant standards put forth by the Historic Preservation Commission. No neighbors would be impacted by the addition. For these reasons, we would like to request that this petition be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll ask for staff report on this one.
Thank you, Chairman Peretz. This request is for the partial demolition of an existing sunroom as well as a replacement addition in generally the same location, although the proposed addition will be larger than the existing room that is there today. There are positive findings for the partial demolition. I think enlargement of the sunroom that has been modified over time from the original space is an appropriate area to look at for an addition. Staff did express some concern for the materiality proposed for this project. Primarily, the plans are noted as using a clay roof, which may be appropriate for the architectural style, and I think it's important for the commission to discuss that element. The original drawings do exist, and they do note the use of cedar shingles, and we would really need to evaluate the structural integrity of the house to determine if it could support a heavier material such as slate or clay. The other concerns that we've talked through with the petitioner is the use of limestone and the detailing of the proposed addition. So I welcome the Commission's input and direction on the use of the limestones for the arches and the timber detailing on the addition as well. We are recommending approval of the petition this night, recognizing that these are preliminary drawings, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have and welcome your discussion.
All right, thank you. And are there questions for the petitioner or for the staff report?
I'd certainly like to hear the petitioner's comments regarding the shingle, the cedar shingle on the roof rather than the clay roof.
Yeah, I think our original intent was to do clay tile. There are lots of examples of this around town in great old historic houses, a lot of David Adler houses. But I think really after investigating the structure of the house, it's not really doable. So I think at this point we're leaning towards doing cedar shingle. Marie Pasquesi had requested that I look into some other alternatives that might, in the form of like a synthetics or like an imitation slate that would be lighter. But so that's why at this point it's a little bit undetermined. But I think we're leaning towards cedar shingle.
And how about the staff's question about limestone, the use of the limestone?
Well, there are some limestone elements on the structure. I think what we would intend to do is if we were to introduce limestone, it would be more of a French limestone, kind of what you see under that model there, which has a little bit more of a buff color, to try and relate more to the Chicago Common brick. And what I wanted to do with the arches on the exterior, you see this. Let me see if I can find this picture. There's a lot of this mortise and the heavy timbering inside the house, and it's kind of carried through on a lot of the lintels of the exterior of the house. And so, there's each one of these has this chamfering that has sort of this delicate detail at the end, and so the intent with the limestone would be to carry that through on the sunroom and sort of mimic that little chamfer. It's a subtle detail, but I think it would
Sure.
Translate well.
Let me ask you about the hierarchy of the front facade of this building, and maybe we could go back to either your proposed elevation. I think your proposed elevation would be nice. Well, let's start with the picture, if you don't mind, of the existing house, and I'll try to ask this question without spending a half an hour asking it. So first of all, this is just a beautiful house, and compliments to the owner on maintaining it and having the good sense to buy it to begin with. Wonderful house. Is a difficult house to modify, particularly in a major way. So the question I have is about the hierarchy of the front elevation and how you thought about it when you went to designing this house, because what you seem to be doing to me is punctuating the addition, both with the materials and the way that it stands apart from the rest of the house, as opposed to kind of falling into place as you proceed away from the entrance of the home. And so I'd like your thoughts about that, and because I might be looking at it wrong, I might be thinking about it wrong. So I'm curious if you were trying to punch this portion of the elevation up, or if you consider it to be of a lesser element, or how you were, what the design intention of the balance of the front of the elevation is.
Well, I think in many ways the form follows what we're kind of intending to do on the interior in terms of the expansion of the master bedroom and the enlarged sunroom, which is they're wanting to accommodate a few different furniture arrangements. And, when I was first approached with this project, Marie Pasquesi talked about matching the double gable on both ends so that the house was more symmetrically balanced. And my first reaction right away was that that felt like it would be way too much mass. So we sort of scaled back to a single gable. But I think her original intention was to sort of bring a little bit more mass to that side of the house. I think it's a little bit, it really steps down quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Other questions for the petitioner?
Well, as long as we're on that subject, Scott, could you put up your proposed elevation drawing? Then maybe that might take us to another level. Well, as a matter of fact, can you go, okay, that's the original, right? Let's just look at that for a minute.
Yes.
When I don't know why, maybe if someone was to tell me it's the double gable on Wensia, over by the golf course, I would think, first of all, that's this house. It's so distinctive in my memory that I would imagine it must be this house. It's just a real unique piece. And if you look over to the left side of the house, Anderson, in his typical fashion, subordinates those ends and he steps them down and does a nice job, and actually kind of reminds me of your work, if you want, some of the things we've seen from you over the years. And can you put some of the existing rear elevation drawings up?
The drawings or the photos?
Do you have any drawings? You had some in the packet. Did you put any? Because this might speak to Kurt's thought. I mean, just that grouping there, he kind of trails the building off and, you know, he's got a double group, small number of gables, and he's got a vent and then a gable. You see, he's kind of trailing the building off. There's a rank of hierarchy of massing. And then maybe you could put your proposed up there. And I know you're dealing with second floor space. By the way, I think that enfilade into ensuite through the house with the arch to the loggia is a pretty great way to make a small house feel grand. That's a really nice touch. Now your proposed elevation is on top, right?
Correct.
And I was just wondering, the detailing and everything is taken from the existing double gable form, but you've single gabled it. And now it's starting to make me think of the house of three gables on Anwencia, and it's starting to lose that original thing. And I have a feeling that you've probably looked at this a number of different ways possibly, but I just wonder if this solution is going to make the house look like it has an identity crisis, as if it maybe has a front door on that side too and it's a duplex or something of that nature. If there's a way to subordinate that left-hand side, maybe even the ridge line, to the way Anderson originally did it, and to somehow reshape that dormer roof without giving up too much of the closet space. But they do have an increase of closet space of at least 200% more. So I think that it might be worth even taking out some of that closet space, then possibly compromise the front of the house. Your little model here is just so fetching that if that was all we had to see, you're home early, you know. And actually, I was thinking about the comment about the limestone as far as the hierarchy. It doesn't exist around the front doors as it does here. So I was wondering, but when I see that interior photograph with the arches, I almost think that if you went to timber, it would seem just a little bit too provincial, and I kind of am attracted to the way that the limestone looks kind of great when you finally see it.
I know we're moving to deliberations instead of questions a little bit, so it's okay. But
are you thinking that you could look at that some more? That's my question.
There's a question.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I agree. I think if the homeowners are willing to give up a little bit of space on the second floor, I think my instinct is as well to possibly reduce the scale of that.
Okay.
Well, let's move from unless we have more questions, let's move to our public comment period, see if anybody has a public testimony, and I see one hand at least, so we'll go ahead and entertain that, and then we'll deliberate.
So everybody agrees this is a great house, a great find, a great buy, and probably the taxes aren't too big because the property's not too big, so that would be an attractive feature. I know Stanley Anderson work a lot. We've got 4 houses that he did for our campus circle buildings over there. So I've been in them for years. And what we're getting at here, some is the asymmetricality of Tudor style. One of the things that these guys all did was they stayed within a certain vocabulary, working together with, they would play with the elements, they would never copy something, but they would move around elements that they found in different picture books. We've got a whole pile, I could probably stack up on the floor, that many books of Tudor architecture that would show some of this, and Mrs. Pasquesi, you might want to look at some of those, or you'd be willing to come and see all the kind of picture books that came out that were in Anderson's library and similar people. I wrote the book a couple years ago about Walter Fraser. He's got a couple of really good examples of this where they added on to him twice. The same architect came back and added on twice to these places. There's one on Laurel that he did for, well, there's a couple of them anyway, where he added on different wings but kept the same vocabulary, but stayed with the asymmetricality and always clear where the front door is. On that front facade, you know where that front door is. It's right in that double gable thing there. That's your entrance. I think there are things that can be done over there to diminish it in some ways that would make it clear that it was a step down. One would be just, I can't remember the exact architectural term for it, but just hipping a little bit, and you wouldn't even have to lose any closet space. If you just hipped back, made a kind of a cottagey bow on that front, on that additional gable, it might even have a big impact of just sloping that back a little bit so that it wasn't as prominent and didn't pull attention away from the other. One of the things about the Tudor period is you did have the introduction of the three arches like that, which is a little bit of Roman, Latin introduced in that period, they were kind of, you're a little ambivalent, the English, because of their religious, they had artistic differences with Rome at that period. And so they, in terms of whether they would be part of the Catholic Church, so that kind of made Roman style not so big for a while. But I think those elements there can be made to reflect the kind of that the Tudors were playing with, introducing that sort of style. I did have a question about the rounded, sort of more Regency semicircular window, which is almost classical in character. What would be more typical of the Tudor style would be something that would be more like a three-sided thing that stuck out somehow. That would be more, I think, in the Tudor vocabulary. And you could even have little crenellations on the top of it. Another alternative I thought of for that wing to the south that you have there would be to actually do what they did was in different centuries they would do different things and have something that was almost Georgian with just a little bit of a crenellations at the top, but was brick that would fade back into the house there. So that it would be a different kind of vocab. It would be the same period kind of, but it would be more of a castle sort of a thing. So I think there's some things you could do so that you wouldn't have that three of the same thing going on at the same time. But it is possible to find lots of precedents in Tudor architecture for solving the kind of problem that you want to have that would leave an asymmetrical house, which means not centered like that wonderful one we just looked at on Barberry, and keep that informality like like Anderson did, like Fraser did, like Chester Walcott did in town. There's lots of good examples of it. And I think it's a solvable problem, and it's just thinking how you can do it. But there's great vocabulary for this. There are lots of books. I can get you a list of the books that Stanley Anderson had. That's available, so could be done. Good. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
I completely agree with his comment about the bay in the back. It's beautifully rendered, but the semicircular form, I think it makes it almost feel contemporary. Like it maybe should be shallower, or like the gentleman said, maybe a three-sided space. It almost just seems too much of like a modern protrusion to this classically Tudor home.
Looking for the drawing. This one here. Any other deliberation? I mean, I think what we've heard is that we're not opposed to seeing some changes to this house. We like the notion of the sunroom. Sounds like a really great space. I'm not sure that we're ready to even address whether it's limestone or it sounds like it probably would be wood shingle. But I think we would encourage you to go back and study the front elevation in particular and look particularly at the asymmetrical nature of these Tudor houses that they want to be, and also preserve the hierarchy of the design. You know, I think really Guy said it really well when he said, you know, the character of the house is what we're trying to preserve. So when you're driving by this house, in a perfect world, we haven't changed the character. We haven't turned it into something different. We want to be able to preserve the essential nature of this house, and it's hard for me to put that in words. I think that this addition would be fairly, you know, overt, and so we need to find some way to downplay it a little bit more. But I don't think that we're opposed to seeing some, you know, some changes. It's just that we'd like to see them done a little more sensitively to the existing character of the house. I think, again, this is one I'd like to table, I believe. So I'll ask for a motion to continue this. So moved by Commissioner Moyer. Any second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Berg, and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We've tabled 2 tonight. That means we'll have more work next month. But we appreciate your listening to our constructive criticism, and hopefully we have helped.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have one last agenda item. Does Fred need, do we need 5 minutes here? Anybody, does anybody need 5 minutes? I think we're good. So our last agenda item is a request for a certificate of appropriateness to allow, I'm sorry, I don't have it. There it is. On the back. Certificate of appropriateness for approving signage, awnings, and lighting at Caribou Coffee, 620 Northwestern Avenue. And we're going to get a little explanation from the representative, and then we're going to learn all about signage from our staff. Are we ready? I don't know. We'll ask her. All right, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jan Fiola. I'm the Senior Real Estate Manager with Caribou Coffee, and I apologize for my voice. I just got back from the shopping center convention in Las Vegas, so it's been a long, long week. But I did want you to know that Caribou is very excited to be leasing the space at 620 through 624 Northwestern, and a historic building. We're very, very sensitive to the beautiful architecture of the building. So we've worked very, very closely with staff. As you know, Caribou would like our customers to know that it's branded Caribou. Our new awnings are actually Cara Blue, so we would have liked to go with blue awnings, but once again, in trying to stick with the architectural flavor of Lake Forest, work with staff, and we're proposing tonight to go with two brown awnings above the two front windows, and then a reduced signage above the front door. As you can imagine, most of our customers are walking on Western from the east and west, so we're looking to have some small signage on the side of the awnings also. So, you know, we're trying to keep in coordination with the quality and the character of its architecture. We're very, very sensitive to Mr. Mann was the architect of the building, and we're below the allowable signage square footage, and we're looking tonight to for your approval.
All right, thank you very much. Megan?
Thank you, Chairman Peretz. Last one of the evening. This signage request is before the commission primarily because it's an illuminated sign. They are proposing 3 gooseneck signs to illuminate the main sign above the door. The proposal has several components. There's the main sign above the door. There's 2 awning signs with text both on the street-facing valance as well as the valance is perpendicular to the sidewalk. And then, of course, the illumination. I think it's really important that the commission carefully consider signage in our business district. We do have a pretty extensive sign ordinance in place that really serves to preserve the character of our downtown and really make Lake Forest the special place that it is. The current proposal in terms of the size of signage does comply with our ordinance. But the main areas that I encourage the commission to focus their discussion this evening is on the scale of the signage proposed, the amount of signage proposed, and the lighting option. Just based on experience throughout the business district, it is important to really get the size of the lettering correct on an awning so that it doesn't look tight or overscaled for the size of the valance on which it's placed. I think as proposed, the letters are 5 inches, and those appear pretty large on an 8-inch valance. So I'd encourage the commission to comment on the size of the lettering on the awnings. And then also I'd just like to note the conditions of approval regarding the lighting. We are recommending that a condition be placed on this approval that the lighting be set on a timer to turn off with the close of business. Generally, Lake Forest is pretty dark. There is a street light right by the door of this building, so there will be illumination throughout the night because of that. But we just want to be consistent with the rest of the businesses in the district. And we're also asking that the commission direct staff to evaluate the intensity of lighting after installation to make sure that that consistency is achieved and that we're not creating a bright spot in our downtown with this proposal. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
What are the hours of business? When does this close?
Hours are from 6 to 10.
Besides the signage that's being proposed, is there going to be additional identification of Caribou Coffee, like on the windows or in some other area?
Possibly some signage inside the windows, but nothing outside. More on the,
When you say inside the windows, what do you mean by that?
more in reference to marketing information, but not Caribou sign.
So there wouldn't be like, painted lettering on the windows
No.
themselves or something like that?
No.
And Commissioner Ransom, I will add that because they're proposing a wall sign, window signage would not be allowed per code. They would be permitted, hours of business on their door or something to that manner in accordance with our ordinance. But this is the signage that's proposed for the building.
So Megan, we have probably not seen a lot of downtown signage lately. And I'm just trying to make sure I understand. This complies with all of the ordinance requirements. So it's just a question of the historic impact of this sign and how it relates to other aspects of the downtown. The lighting itself, in terms of other people having lit signs, there's precedence for that. There's other applications of that. Do you have any of those in mind?
You're asking for other locations with illumination?
Yeah.
The ones that I can think of off the top of my head are the Fresh Market has some lighting similar to this that's
Right.
being proposed.
Mm-hmm.
Jewel and Walgreens, I believe, have backlit signs. Some of the bigger stores downtown have lighting. But I will also speak to the first part of your comment. The sign ordinance is written such that any illumination is required to be reviewed by either the Historic Preservation Commission or the Building Review Board. So that is a point that we really carefully look at in town.
All right, well, are there other questions?
Have alternatives to this sign over the doorway been looked at, like vertical signs or that adhere to the building rather than, have this larger sign that seems to, take up the whole length of the space? Yes, no?
We work closely with staff because the sign's usually above the front door. We had more lighting originally. Those are gooseneck lights. They're only 100 watts each, but that's pretty minimal now, down to 3 gooseneck lights over the sign above the front door.
So I know we have some deliberations on this. Are there other questions before we?
Am I to understand that it looks like it is on the side of the awning? There's also Caribou Coffee on each of the 4 sides of the 2 awnings?
Correct. We were mentioning that a lot of the people are coming from the east and west, so otherwise you'd be just looking at the side, blank side of the awning.
Is there a rendering of that side elevation?
I think this is it right here. Is
Are they on the
Oh, I
sides
see,
of the
I
awnings
see, I
next
see,
to
I
the
see.
front door
I didn't see it. Thank
as
you.
well?
Yeah,
They're on the 2 far sides,
Two
right?
far sides, but not on
I don't
so
think
not
so.
on 4, not on 6 sides, on 4
Right.
sides.
So in other
Awnings.
words, 2
The
sides,
north
2
and
far
south,
sides.
And then
Correct.
the 2 east sides, okay.
And that's a 3-inch lettering on that one. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, 3 and 2 inches, I guess, both, okay.
Is, I'm hoping this has something to do with what we're talking about. Is the ceiling dropped inside these stores? I mean, there used to be window up above here, but this is green now. I think this is plywood.
There's a picture without the
awnings are up in this photo, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's,
Here.
Yeah, it looks like the T111 or something like that. I mean, that's not going to be replaced again with glass or anything like that to let more light in the store, is it?
No, no.
It's not planning on changing, okay. Now, one thing I do remember from memory, and this is a good photograph, is that there's a detail at the bottom of this, let's call it very discreet bay window, you know, and it does, the stucco kind of curls up underneath it. And I was just wondering, when we put all those gooseneck lights and sign, are we going to be getting a little crowded there? I don't know, maybe that's not an issue, but I was just wondering about that. And then also at the bottom of that, there's a little bit,
These come pretty much straight out.
6.5 inches
And
tall,
then-
so that looks like that should probably be okay.
Yeah, because it's a foot out before it gets to the bend even, you know, there's a 23
Yeah.
inches altogether.
That should probably be okay.
Other questions, comments? Fred?
A question for staff or anyone. I didn't have a chance to look at this prior to tonight, and the question being, how does the 8-inch high lettering over the entry, with coffee, et cetera, compare to the size of other lettering in the downtown area? How does that size compare to?
I know that the size of the lettering does comply with our ordinance, which does speak to different heights of signs throughout the business district, whether it's more than 10, more than 12, more than 14 feet off of grade. The size of lettering can increase. So from that standpoint, it's consistent with the design guidelines that are in place. I will say, just to speak to Commissioner Berg's comment about the stucco, we have asked Caribou to look closely at how they plan to attach the sign to the stucco. They have assured us that they've looked at it and it can be done, but that was something that we did bring up when they were proposing to place the signage above the door. Typically, signage would be placed more in a transom and not above the door in this manner throughout the business district. So it's a little bit unique for this building.
Yeah, I think there's kind of precedent for both as we drove around and looked at this. I do have one question. There's to the left side of this door in the picture, there's an existing gutter, downspout I should say, that the signage is just, you know, I mean, in this picture it's photoshopped, and so the trees are kind of stop and start, which I think actually helps the proposal. If we would have seen those trees go through and the light posts go through, it kind of minimizes a little bit, to my eye, the impact of the sign, so I'll just draw them in. But where the downspout goes, it would preclude the edge of that sign from being where it is, and I think that this is the kind of level of detail us guys have to think about here. I think that you need to see some relief between that downspout and the left edge of the sign. And so by the time you do that, and then you shorten it on the other side as well so that it's symmetrical over the door, the whole thing is shrinking proportionately. That's exactly what I would do. I'd get out that Photoshop and I would just click it down a couple of clicks, just so that you can have that relief against that downspout. You know, the rest of this, I don't know about you folks. I'm going beyond my questions, so maybe I should stop right there because I'm deliberating now. Any other questions for our contestant?
I was just going to ask Megan, there's a photo in here of the prior awning for Lake Forest photo. What's the size of that lettering, if you know?
I don't know. I did look in our records to see if I could find the size of the letters, but that's really the standard look that we would want to see in the way the ordinance is written, to see lettering sized in that manner.
So that lettering is basically about half the size of the valance in terms of the block letter itself. The capital letters are larger and probably more in keeping. So here we have a little different style because of the cursive, you know, Caribou is larger, coffee is smaller. And so coffee is 3 1/4 inches on an 8-inch valance, which is roughly in keeping with that half, but Caribou is larger because the logo is larger, so that bleeds up to the 5 inches. You know, for myself, I'm not particularly offended by that. I don't know, what do you guys think? Maybe it should be a shade smaller, but I'm kind of more interested in the sign over the door than than the Valence signs myself, but again, I keep asking questions, right? These are questions. I'm going to ask if there's any public comment, and I see one, so we'll let you talk, Art. I'm sure that we can learn something.
Well, I'm a little bit startled by seeing the Caribou sign up above the into the stucco like that, which seems there may be precedence for it. I don't consider Fresh Market, which I don't think is in the historic district.
I was going to ask that, actually.
Is as being relevant. If the rules are the same for the non-historic district and the historic district, I would look for what are the precedents inside the district for Starbucks, Einstein's, Foodstuffs, that sort of thing. Or I guess those are in the historic district.
Toy station.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
You know,
and
when,
is this
when,
is
when
this
you,
going to lead to
when,
a stampede of people wanting a sign
well,
on
when,
that scale?
but you know, the thing is, when you drive around the square and start looking at the signage, there's a lot of signage.
It's a lot. There's a lot.
But
of
a lot of it is
variation.
grandfathered in,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I mean,
think it's older.
Heelanders itself is a huge sign.
Right, but
And
that's
it's
there
sculptural.
because Heelanders has been there since
Yeah.
Rover was a pup.
Well, what I mean by that, though, is that it's not that they get to do it, so they get to do it. It's that your recollection of the signage is not that it's oppressive in the square. And
Because
I
it's
think that's the
separated
point.
off from the structure.
Well, the signage in the square is all uniform.
Yeah.
And it's all the same typeface, and it's a
This is
branded
in
sign,
the
which is
part
different.
above the window parts. That's all I'm saying.
Well,
I'm just asking the question, but it
No,
seems
no.
to me like what I think you could have is a stampede of people from Starbucks and everybody in to have a bigger sign. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we can deliberate. Let's see, looks like Megan might have an answer to a question for us.
Just a general comment, just based on some of the questions that have been asked and the public testimony that we just heard. It may be a good idea for the commission to direct Caribou to install a mock-up of the sign, just to see what the size impact would be, what the impact of text on awnings plus wall signs would have on the area, and to help with your deliberation. Just a suggestion.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little bit sensitive to the, now I'm deliberating, folks, I'm talking to, so you can
Deliberate, too.
yeah, deliberate too. I'm not too worried about a stampede of folks coming back to us and saying that you did it for them, you should do it for us, and that kind of thing. I think that our job here is to make sure it looks good on a building that, we want to make, that we want to continue to protect. So I guess that's the only way I can focus on it. I can't take a poll of the other signs and try to decide what's the democratic thing to do. So I'll just, forget about the other ones for a minute, even though I drove around and looked at them all. I'm not tempted to force this sign off the stucco. That's not my first impression. My first impression is not to say, oh, it's got to be, below the timber. So there's not really a spot there that matter of fact, I kind of like that the timber framing is not interrupted by some sign in this case for some reason, so I do think that I'd like to see the sign a little bit smaller above that framing because I don't want it to be bumping up against that gutter. I think that would look stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that kind of informs a dimensional change to the whole thing. The colors I think are fine. The side of the awnings, I don't know if we have precedent for lettering on the sides of awnings, but
Barber shop has lettering on the side.
yeah, and I know that that's a very common thing these days. I mean, and it's true, that's how you see this, people walk around the corner and that's the sign they actually will see. So I don't mind it. I'm also, not, I am a little bit conscious of, the fact that we want to create an environment for retailers that they want to be in. So I'm sensitive to that too. I don't want to be too obstructive in terms of the kinds of signs that they would have. But that's kind of my thoughts on it, so.
Yeah, I agree, Kurt. I think that the logistics of the amount of room above the opening for your sign needs to be addressed.
Yeah,
You understand those things, okay? I think that will also help from a scale standpoint, by making it a little less wide than the opening right now, than that big masonry opening, because it's starting to kind of dominate and compete with that arched timber. So that, I think that if you just size that down with good taste, that should probably work. I'm kind of okay with the awning, maybe a little bit smaller with the lettering, perhaps a tiny bit, and I think that would probably be all right with me. Maybe you don't need to put Caribou Coffee on the returns of the inside faces of those signs.
She said they weren't.
So
just
they
on the
weren't, then
outside.
that's fine too, and,
Put them on the two ends.
yeah, and this is right on my way to work, so bingo, I get my coffee
Yay.
there. Those are my thoughts.
A couple comments. I like the suggestion that Megan made that a mock-up be made. I think we could all evaluate it better. I don't think it needs to replicate the final result. I don't mean to make it elaborate.
I did bring both the gooseneck lighting with me and a mock-up of the corner of the signage, so if that'll help you, and a color of the awning, so.
Right. Well, that would be helpful, but I mean, by mock-up, that we would see the size. There's going to be foam board. It doesn't need to be rendered or painted and made the correct brown or so on and so forth. It just needs to address the issue of the size of the lettering and how large it appears in the context of the streetscape. That would be useful. And then the second thing is related to that. In the mounting of that, we're talking about the stucco and how does it meet the stucco. I would suggest considering the stemming out of the sign, relieving it from the stucco with at least 3 inches of stems, bronze stems, bringing it on 2 places, so it's bracketed out and independent of the wall and not attached to the stucco wall. It's stuck to the wall, an independent element.
It's quite different than the detail that's being offered. Right now it's a steel angle and it's a box sign that's hung out.
I could see it be more light and discreet and sort of like the building has its identity behind it and it's independent of the building and not now a part of that building. That's just a thought. I like the small Caribou Coffees on each awning because frankly I think that people do look at a window as, is this the place? Are there bicycles behind this window or what? Is this it? Is this what I'm looking for? And I think the signs would be helpful for wayfinding. But my gut reaction is the sign over the door is overkill. I mean, the size of it may be, and that it would even enhance the quality of your presentation to be more discreet. In other words, that understatement would be, in my view, more well received than that. Here we are, to the trains going by. They can't buy coffee anyway. They're on the train. So I think it could be smaller.
So Fred's point, just to make sure we beat that one up a little further, what's shown in the section right now is a typical internally illuminated box sign, and I think that's the standard detail for probably the prototype sign here. What we're saying is instead of, and I know it wouldn't be internally illuminated, but I think what we're saying is if you look at a lot of the signs in town, they're really flat panels, they're painted, they're whatever they are, the material is flat, the letters are just like here, they come off of the face of but the sign isn't box mounted to the building, it's actually reliefed from the building, so set off with a bracket of some sort, so that the building can continue through it and you don't offend the surface of the building for 8 feet or whatever it is. That way when you take the sign off, looks like she's got something for us. Right, so, and that's exactly
what you're talking about, so this is going to be mounted to the building, back in this way, in this corner. So I think what you're suggesting then is taking this and mounting it 3 inches away from the building.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that you necessarily need it to be quite so
thick.
Turn it sideways for us to see.
It's a relatively thin sign.
Yeah. I mean,
less than that.
there's the question of how much structure how thin she can make it. But I do think that it starts to get a little thick. That's about as thick as I'd ever want to see it. And I think that.
Well, I was
thinner,
thinking
probably.
what Fred was describing in my mind. I was thinking of it being at the most about 1 inch thick and a rigid surface like a real signboard. And then if you wanted to put letters on that. See, I don't know that maybe what we should do is maybe we don't want that backing. we want something that looks more like a board.
Yeah, so turn that forward against to us. Mhm.
And maybe
Yeah.
they mount that onto the board, but the board itself is custom for this store, or this application, you're going on.
So
to
part
an
of
old
the
stucco.
sensitivity is just to the material
Oh.
itself, and we've got this historic building with this timber structure and stucco, and so instead of seeing an aluminum box sign, we'd rather see white letters or whatever they are on a brown board, you know.
A mounting board behind this to make it look architecturally.
No,
more-
actually behind the letters instead of the aluminum metal.
Oh.
You got it, yeah. We're trying to make your life as difficult as possible. You can't wait to go back, can't wait to go back to real estate.
Yeah,
committee.
go back
Is
to
that the box
corporate.
part, maybe the box part that isn't resonating with us. We don't mind the letter in the outline perimeter piece, but on an actual board that's about an inch thick maximum.
I think that we probably have references that exist in Lake Forest to, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but, you know, there's other examples of how this is already done in a very similar manner, and I'm sure Megan would be very happy to show you those. And perhaps, I think Megan's got the right idea in terms of
A mock-up.
either a mock-up or a further review of the actual materials of the sign. I'm more or less confident that this could be done by a subcommittee led by Commissioner Moyer, whose idea it was. I believe.
We could all show up,
We could all show up or whatever.
in a designated time,
Yeah.
like we did with the Market Square
Why
side.
don't you tell us your ideas on that, Kathy?
I just wanted to mention that the Building Review Board worked on Fresh Market, and they did have a mock-up done, different size letters. They looked carefully at the letters. In that case, the letters were individual, and they were on pins. They looked at the dimension. They looked at various types of lighting.
Yeah.
So I think the Building Review Board found that a mock-up was very helpful.
That would
And
be.
I think that because this is part of the Central Business District, it probably is appropriate. I know you don't want to continue another one, but
Oh, no.
Well, I'm not sure.
to have that
It's
discussion
important, you know.
publicly.
I'm not sure that we need to continue if we establish a committee to review it, but you guys tell me, what do you think about that? I mean, would you rather see a mock-up of this before a vote?
Yeah, I'd rather see a mock-up.
Okay.
I think so. I think the size is a huge issue.
Okay.
In terms of the character
Yeah.
of the sign.
And I think that we could make ourselves available to do that, you know, on site so that we see it with the building. You know, we can coordinate that with Megan and at least get as many of us as possible. That would be very helpful, and maybe we get some photographs of that too for the, yeah.
I go by all with that.
All right, let's see. I think we did the questions. I think we did the public testimony. Did we do deliberations? Are there any more
Yes.
thoughts for us?
Yeah, we can continue with the markup.
All right, so I will look for a motion to continue another, this particular request.
Okay, I move to continue the petition with the request that the petitioner provide us with a mock-up, work with the city on providing us with a mock-up of the sign.
So moved by Commissioner Ransom. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Berger. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And that says continued. Appreciate your efforts to get here this evening. and I hope-
Welcome to town, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The good news is you're not trying to put a huge addition on this building. Thank you. All right, let's see if we have anything else on the agenda for this evening. And are there any other items? Opportunity for the public to address the Historic Preservation Commission on non-agenda items? I see one.
The last tiny point, I know that there was a house, well, it comes up occasionally in general, and it might be helpful to have in staff reports, whether or not what's being proposed by a particular petitioner is going to change in the historic district something from being a contributing structure to becoming a non-contributing structure. There are certain guidelines. I think they're probably part of what's going on with the ordinance. If they aren't, it would still be interesting background to know if, from the state review process and the National Register status process, if something might move something from being a contributing to a non-contributing structure in terms of how it relates to the facade change, any changes to the facade. I don't know the answers to all those things. Sometimes you have to have somebody from the state come and look at it, but there may be a way that staff could address that for you.
Appreciate that, thank you. All right, any other additional information from the staff? All right, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Berg, seconded by Commissioner Moyer. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you and good evening.